Chapter 451. Crafting talismans took up a lot of time. If it was short, it could take a year and a half. If it was long, it could take up to 100 years. Therefore, after killing Jin Tan, Zhang Yan only stayed on Turtle Snake Mountain for a few days before he decided to go to Zhenluo Alliance to look for an expert craftsman. This time, he did not use the sword escape technique. Instead, he went above the extreme sky and traveled with the help of the strong wind. In just 3 days, he had traveled more than 100,000 miles. On this day, he parted the clouds and looked down. He saw 2 mountains, one in the south and one in the north, facing each other across the water. Between the 2 mountains, looking towards the heavy clouds, there was another floating island. It was shaped like a funnel, with beautiful flowers and jade grasses everywhere, a waterfall dripping with crystals, and a large expanse of icy mist. Under the illumination of the sunlight, there were rainbow bridges flashing by from time to time, and the scenery was dreamlike. Ever since the Lai Xian sect attacked Ping Shi, Zhenluo Alliance had retreated deep into the mountains. Although there were endless mountains here, one should not think that it was a barren land. The Central Pillar continent was rich. Even Pingdong was not comparable to other continents. There were 300 small countries in the mountains with a population of close to 10 million. It was the core of Zhenluo Alliance. After hundreds of years of operation, it was connected to mountains and rivers. The Double Moon Peak was in the middle of the mountains. It was shaped like 2 lotus flowers. Separated by a river, they looked at each other from afar. It was a famous scenic spot. Because the 2 mountains looked the same, even the flowers and plants on the mountains were the same, and there was an illusory fog lingering in the mountains, it was hard to distinguish the real from the fake. Every time people came here to look into the distance, they could not tell which mountain the reflection in the clear water belonged to. Because of this, there was a poem that praised, "The 2 moons reflect on the clear water. What is the sorrow of the fallen city? It is as if the shadow is not seen. The painting mirror reflects the lonely." Due to the obstruction of the Great Formation, it was impossible to fly in the Twin Moon Peak, so Zhang Yan descended on the cloud and landed on the North Moon Peak. He saw that the entire mountain was built according to the mountain. From the foot of the mountain all the way to the peak, there were pavilions and winding corridors along the way. They were all gorgeous and well arranged. He put his hands behind his back. He walked up the stairs. Because he was very fast, he reached the peak in a short while. At the peak of this mountain was a provincial city. The stream of people weaved about, bustling with noise and excitement. Outside the city was a sparkling and clear lake, willows growing all over the embankment. Spring was in full bloom. Birds were chirping and boats were coming and going on the lake. There were also many boys and girls who were enjoying themselves on the boats, playing flutes and zither. Zhang Yan had heard that there were 2 cities on the Double Moon Peak. Back when the Shaoqing sect attacked the Central Pillar continent, the cultivators who escaped here shaved off the mountain peaks and dug up the soil to make a lake. Until now, more than 400 years had passed. He was looking for an expert blacksmith. It was also in these 2 state cities. After entering the city, he walked along the streets and saw inns, restaurants, stalls, tea houses, and gambling dens. Everything in the secular world could be found here. Because the people of the secular world and cultivators of the Central Pillar state lived together, and it was a popular place to enjoy life, the cities of the Central Pillar state were more prosperous and beautiful than any other state. 13800-100 the starting lineup. He circled around the city, and after asking around a little, he already had an idea of what was going on. He then headed towards the southeast corner of the city. There was a hill there, and it could be seen from afar. At the top, there was a pavilion with flying eaves and corners. The houses under the hill were connected, surrounded by clear water. Among the dozens of people that Zhao Xiong mentioned, there were actually 2 people who were the best. One was Wei Shuden, and the other was Liang Changgong. And that Liang Changgong lived here. Coincidentally, this person had once refined a few magic weapons for the disciples of that fierce person. If his methods were not brilliant enough, that fierce person would not have sent his disciples to look for him several times. However, to say that Liang Changgong had any collusion with that fierce person, Zhang Yan felt that it was not necessarily so. Otherwise, this matter would not have been known to Zhao Xiong, such an unranked disciple. At this moment, in the pavilion, a spirited scholar bowed to a young girl and said apologetically, "Lady Yu, I'm sorry. Master Liang has been refining a magic treasure for a guest for the past few days and is extremely tired. He's currently recuperating and really can't leave. Please return." This young girl was only 17 or 18 years old. She wore a red coat, and her hair was combed into a double helix bun. Her eyes were beautiful, and she did not wear any makeup. Her expression was calm and tranquil, and there were 20 to 30 people protecting her. One of the maidservants beside her suddenly spoke. "Pavilion Master Liang, are you trying to avoid seeing my wife by evading like this? Or are you afraid that you can't refine a magic weapon? Or lose your reputation?" The scholar had a sincere expression, and cupped his hands, saying, "This lady must be joking. This is a coincidence, I am indeed not avoiding." The young girl's expression was indifferent and said, "Since Pavilion Master Liang is not free, then come back another day." Wait. At this moment, a handsome young man in a brocade robe walked out. He had a jade belt around his waist, and he wore a crown on his head. There was a faintly discernible arrogance in his expression, and he said, "Sister Lihua, you don't have to be in a hurry to leave. If you want to see Liang Changgong, I will ask fifth uncle to inform him." The young girl smiled lightly and said, "Brother Yin probably doesn't know Pavilion Master Liang's temper, and he is not someone you can see just because you say so." The handsome young man didn't believe it. He said something to the person beside him, and the follower hurriedly ran inside. The scholar didn't stop him and allowed him to go in. After a while, the follower came out dejectedly. It was obvious that he didn't find anything. The handsome young man was annoyed and said, "Liang Changgong, you don't even give fifth uncle face? I am so angry." The young girl seemed to have expected this, and she waved her hand and said, Let's go." When this group of people left the door, Zhang Yan also happened to be in front of this wide pavilion. A female servant with bright eyes and white teeth came out to greet him and said clearly, "If you are here to refine magic weapons, please go to the corridor on the left, and when you see a peach blossom forest, there will be someone to greet you." Liang Changgong also had a few disciples under him, and since normal cultivators could not ask him to do it, his disciples would help him refine magic weapons. The servant's eyesight was not very good, and she only saw Zhang Yan coming alone, and he did not have a carriage with him, so she only thought he was an ordinary guest. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back, and said indifferently, "There is no need to go through so much trouble. Call Liang Changgong out to see me." The handsome young man was originally walking out, but he inadvertently heard this, and his footsteps stopped. He couldn't help but look over with a smile, and he said, "Strange, there seems to be someone with more spirit than me today." The young girl also heard this, and she smiled reservedly. She didn't even turn around to look, and only walked towards the soft sedan that was parked in front of the pavilion. In the past, there were some people who overestimated their own abilities, thinking that Liang Changgong was only a smithing expert, and tried to order him around. However, they didn't know that his identity was special. Not only was he a core formation cultivator, but he also had the position of an elder in Jinluo Union. How could he be seen by ordinary people? The servant was startled, and she immediately said coldly, "The pavilion master has no time to see guests. If you want to see him, then please leave." Zhang Yan smiled and waved his sleeve. Suddenly, a gust of astral wind swept out like a tidal wave, crashing into the pavilion's restrictions. Immediately, there was a series of crackling noises, and it seemed like it was going to collapse. Seeing this, the surrounding people all cried out in alarm, and they all ran outside. The handsome young man's legs also became soft, and if it weren't for the support of his two followers, he would have already fallen to the ground. The servant's face was even paler, and she was horrified. Such a huge commotion immediately alerted the people inside the room. Not long after, the scholar ran out with a head full of cold sweat. His gaze turned and saw Zhang Yan. He carefully stepped forward and bowed, saying, "May I know where you've come from?" Zhang Yan slapped a green Yonggang jade into his hand and said with a smile, "Take this and give it to Liang Changgong. Whether he wants to see you or not, it's all up to him." Although the scholar didn't know what it was, he still carefully put it away, and then he cupped his hands, saying, "Please wait a moment." Zhang Yan was very clear that if he wanted to see Liang Changgong, according to the usual etiquette, he didn't know how much effort it would take to see him. He didn't want to waste time here, so he cut the Gordian knot with a knife, and used the most direct and effective method. Not long after, the sound of footsteps resounded, and a scholarly man in his 40s with thick lips and a protruding nose and a long beard walked out from the room. When his gaze fell onto Zhang Yan, his expression couldn't help but become solemn, and he walked straight up to Zhang Yan. He cupped his hands and gestured to the side. "Fellow Taoist, please forgive me for not serving you well. Please come in and have a seat." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and followed him in. As soon as his figure disappeared, everyone present immediately felt their hearts relax, and they all let out a long breath. The young woman held onto the palanquin's rails and gasped for breath with great effort before she was able to stand up straight. She looked back with a lingering fear in her heart. Earlier, that flick of Zhang Yan's sleeve seemed to have caused the weather to change, the earth to quake, and everyone here was pressed down by an enormous imposing aura to the point their breathing was almost stopped, and they were even unable to move in the slightest. She'd only seen such an imposing aura from one person. She took another breath and said to the servant girl beside her, "I don't know where this person came from, but he definitely isn't a member of Zhenluo Union. Quickly send me out of the city, I want to see the ancestor." Liang Changgong invited Zhang Yan into the inner room, and after asking him to take a seat, he respectfully bowed and said, "This spiritual master, I just now didn't know you were coming to visit, I hope you can forgive me." Although he was a master refiner, and his cultivation was also at the first tier of core transformation, he couldn't put on any airs in front of a Yuanying spiritual master. Even in the entire Zhenluo Union, there were only a dozen or so Yuanying spiritual masters, and they were all people with respected statuses. They wouldn't easily show themselves, so how could he dare to be rude? Zhang Yan waved his hand, and he went straight to the point. "Fellow Taoist, there's no need to stand on ceremony. I came here to ask fellow Taoist to refine a magic treasure, and I hope fellow Taoist can take a look at it." He stretched out his hand, and a ray of light flew out, and a huge turtle shell appeared in the middle of the hall. There were strange patterns on the shell, and there were strange seal scripts. When Liang Changgong saw this item, he was shocked, and he stood up excitedly. He walked around it a few times, and his lips actually trembled. With his eyesight, he could naturally tell what kind of great demon this item came from. He shakily patted it for a long time, and in the end he sighed and said regretfully, "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "I've long heard of fellow Taoist Liang's skill in refining, so I came to visit because of your reputation. How many spirit shells do you need to refine this treasure? Just tell me, there's no need to hide it." Liang Changgong's expression revealed a little fear. He wasn't arrogant, and not to mention the other party's Yuanying spiritual master, how could a person with such a treasure have a simple background? Because he was afraid that Zhang Yan would misunderstand, he hurriedly explained, "It's not that I'm unwilling, it's just that refining this treasure isn't something that I can do alone." Zhang Yan looked over, and he fixed his gaze on Liang Changgong and said, "Who else do you need?" Liang Changgong couldn't stand his gaze, and he fearfully lowered his head. He hesitated for a moment and said, "If Wei Shudan from the South Moon Peak is willing to help, and the two of us work together, we might have some chance of success. However, he and I have fought for more than 300 years, so I'm afraid he won't give me face." Chapter 452. Although Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan were from the south and north respectively, they did not have much of a relationship with each other. Instead, they had some disagreements. People often compared the talismans forged by the two of them. Although the two of them did not seem to mind, they were secretly competing with each other. After hundreds of years, there was no great enmity between them, but there were many small conflicts. The two of them had only worked together once. At that time, it was to forge a talisman for an elder of Zhenluo Union. The materials used were only slightly inferior to this turtle shell. The talisman forged that time only needed to be nourished for a few years before it gave birth to a true spirit. If it was not for this experience, Liang Changgong would not even dare to say it. Zhang Yan already knew that this matter would not be so easy. However, Gui Zongyao was a great demon in the heavenly abode, so it was reasonable that the remains he left behind were hard to forge. Thus, he nodded and said, "Other than that, are there any other difficulties? Tell me all of them." Liang Changgong slightly lowered his body and said, "To forge this kind of talisman, the materials used are a small matter. I can always gather all of them. However, this turtle shell cannot be forged with a normal furnace. I still need to find a heavenly furnace of earthly fire. Although there is one on Twin Moon Peak, I need the elders of Zhenluo Union to agree to it before I can use it." Zhang Yan pondered for a while and already had a plan in mind. He swung his sleeve and a light flashed. The turtle shell was put away again. He said, "Taoist Liang, there are many things needed to forge this talisman. You should prepare them first. In a few days, I will come back to find you." With that, he turned around and left the house. In just a few breaths, he was out of the building. He looked around and walked towards the nearest city gate. After leaving the city, he leapt up and left the North Moon Peak as a streak of swift golden light, heading straight for the island above the Twin Peaks. He went around the huge waterfall that rumbled like thunder and arrived in front of the protective formation. He stood in the void and said loudly, "Donghua Zhang Yan wishes to pay a visit to the fellow Taoists of Zhenluo Union." This voice traveled far and went straight into the Tao Palace located deep within the island. 3 Taoists dressed in brown robes appeared in the hall at the same time. The Zhenluo Union had a total of 13 Yuanying elders, and they were usually stationed in important cities. The ones left to guard this place were Che Zi, Huang Zuoguang, and Shang Teng, the 3 enlightened masters. They didn't need to go out. Just by listening to the sound of astral winds, they knew that the visitor was definitely a Yuanying Zhenren. Huang Zuoguang's face was wide. His face was flushed and he looked like he was still in his prime. He said in a loud voice, "Elder Shang, you are known to know everything in the world. Do you know where this person came from?" Shang Teng tucked his hands into his sleeves and said slowly, "Elder Huang, what a coincidence. I happen to know this person's background." Huang Zuoguang was waiting to listen, but Shang Teng only said half a sentence and didn't continue. He couldn't help but feel bored, but he didn't want to lose face and ask again. He turned to Che Yi and cupped his fists. "Elder Che, how should we deal with this matter? Should we let him in or not?" Che Yi's face was old and his hair was long gone. Only his eyebrows were still as black as ink. He had lived for 800 years. Among the 3 of them, he was the oldest and had the most prestige. If it wasn't something too urgent, he would make the decisions here. He said in a deep voice, "A guest has come from afar, so we should invite him in and ask about the situation. Only then will it be easier to talk." At this moment, Shang Teng spoke again. He first cupped his fists towards Che Yi and said, "Elder Che, please reconsider. According to what I know, this person is a cultivator from Donghua Continent's Qinsong School. I heard that he killed Guomingda and Pang Yuzhong a few days ago. His Tao technique is extremely high, so I don't know what his motive is here. From what I see, it's better to avoid trouble. We can just persuade him to leave, but don't let him in." Huang Zuoguang snorted and said sarcastically, "Elder Shang is really brave. The 3 of us are here, but you don't even dare to see him. If this gets out, won't our fellow Taoists laugh until their mouths are crooked?" Shang Teng ignored him and turned a deaf ear to his sarcasm. He sneered in his heart, "What a brute." Che Zi seriously considered for a moment and said, "Although Elder Shang's words are wise words, our Zhenluo Union welcomes people of the same path in the world. This person has revealed his identity and came openly to pay his respects. There is no reason for us not to welcome him. Moreover, this person has a grudge with Lai Xian sect. Just this point alone makes it impossible for us to reject him. Elders, please follow me to welcome him." Huang Zuoguang said happily, "Elder Che's words are the same as what I thought. I'll go with you." Shang Teng was a little unwilling, but his thoughts were deep and he didn't show it on his face. Moreover, the 2 of them had the same opinion, so it was useless for him to object. Thus, he silently cupped his fists and expressed his obedience. Che Zi nodded his head in satisfaction. His body shook slightly and he said, "Rise." Huang and Shang both activated their escape techniques at the same time. The three of them flew up together and landed in front of the formation door. Che Zi used his spells to open the formation door and said loudly, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, the formation is open, please come in." Zhang Yan saw that the obstruction in front of him was gone, so he stepped on the wind and entered the flying island. Not far away, he saw three Taoists standing together, and they were all Yuanyin cultivators. He landed in front of them and bowed, saying, "Greetings, fellow Taoists." Che Zi took the lead to return the greeting, saying, "Greetings, Zhenren Zhang." After receiving the greeting, Zhang Yan and the three of them sized each other up. Che Zi saw that he was tall and extraordinary, and in terms of handsome appearance, he could be said to be one in a million. He couldn't help but praise him in his heart, saying, "This fellow Taoist Zhang has an extraordinary appearance." Zhang Yan glanced at them, and from their expressions, he could make a rough judgment. Che Zi said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist has come from afar to visit. Why don't you follow Daoren into the temple and have a taste of the tea here?" Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Sorry to disturb you." Che Zi said, "Please." He got up and flew forward, leading the way. Zhang Yan also followed. After traveling for more than 10 miles, there were many temples in his field of vision. They were built against the mountains, and the roofs were connected, occupying a very large area. The three of them flew into the main hall, and after entering the hall, they sat down as the guest and the host. At this moment, the three of them exchanged names with Zhang Yan, and after serving fragrant tea, they started chatting. Huang Zhuguang was originally a cultivator from the Dongxing continent, but because his sect was destroyed, he came to the Central Pillar continent. He was bold and unrestrained by nature, and he had been to many places, so he was very talkative. Shang Teng was silent, and his eyes flickered. From time to time, he would glance over, as if he was secretly observing Zhang Yan. About an hour later, Huang Zhuguang then asked Zhang Yan about the purpose of his visit. Zhang Yan said, "I came here to refine a magic treasure. I have already found fellow Taoist Liang Zhanggong, and I thought that everything is ready, but he said that he needs to work together with fellow Taoist Wei Shudan to be confident. However, these two Taoists have different temperaments, so it is a bit difficult for them to work together. Because they are from your alliance, I would like to ask the elders to come forward and ask these two Taoists to work together." "Oh." Huang Zhuguang's eyes lit up and he said, "Fellow Taoist, do you need fellow Taoist Wei and fellow Taoist Liang to work together on this magic treasure? There has been such a thing before, huh? If it is successfully refined, you must let me broaden my horizons." At this moment, Shang Teng said casually, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I'm afraid you're not here just for this, right?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Shang is right." Fellow Taoist Liang said that if we want to refine a treasure, we need an earthly fire heavenly furnace. Although there is no lack of this item in my sect, it is hundreds of thousands of miles away. Distant water can't quench the present thirst, so I would like to borrow the furnace of your alliance. I wonder if it is possible? Che Yi pondered for a while and stroked his beard. "Fellow Taoist is making things difficult for us. The heavenly furnace in our alliance is not our private property, so it can't be borrowed just because you say so. This matter requires the other elders to agree." Zhang Yan smiled. He raised his head and swept his gaze across the faces of the three of them. He slowly said, "If your honorable alliance is willing to settle this matter, I am willing to lend you a hand when your honorable alliance fights against the Xian sect in the future." When Huang Zhuguang heard this, he said happily, "Is that true?" Shang Teng's eyes flickered. Che Yi stroked his beard and did not say a word. After a while, he glanced at Shang Teng, and the latter understood and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, this is not a small matter. Fellow Taoist, please allow us to discuss it first before giving an answer. What do you think?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's how it should be." Shang Teng clapped his hands and called a Taoist child over. He said, "Bring Zhenren Zhang to another place to rest." Zhang Yan stood up with a smile, bowed to the three of them, and left with the Taoist child. After he left, Huang Zhuguang said anxiously, "Elder Che, why didn't you agree to him just now? Since this person's Dao technique is so brilliant, we can ask him to lend us a hand and help us recapture our lost land. Whether he succeeds or not, it won't harm us. This is a matter that costs us nothing, so why not? Shang Teng said with a sullen face, I don't think so. This person is a cultivator of the East Flower Continent. How can he interfere with the matters of the Middle Pillar Continent? Now that the outcome between our alliance and the Lai Xian sect has not been decided, there are still many variables. In my opinion, we might as well grant his wish and send him away as soon as possible after we refine that treasure. Huang Zhuguang said disapprovingly, Elder Shang's words are unreasonable. The cultivators of our Zhenluo alliance come from all directions, and there is no distinction between the East Flower Continent and the Central Continent. This person has a favor to ask of us, so we can ask him to help us. It's a reasonable move. Shang Teng said coldly, Elder Huang, have you forgotten about the disaster of the Shaoqing sect? If it wasn't for someone opening a formation to welcome them back then, how could the 1,000-year-old sects of the Central Pillar Continent be destroyed so easily? I've heard that the Dao sect that this Zhang Yan belongs to is comparable to the Shaoqing sect. Just now, you're trying to curry favor with him. What are you trying to do? He was born in the Central Pillar Continent, so he never trusted foreign cultivators like Huang Zhuguang. When Huang Zhuguang heard this, he became angry as well. He stood up and said angrily, What do you mean? Speak clearly to this Huang. Seeing that the two of them were already quarreling, Che Yi separated his hands and comforted them with a gentle voice. Don't argue anymore. We're all family, and both of you are accomplished cultivators. Why get angry over an outsider? Huang Zhuguang snorted and sat down slowly, while Shang Ting turned his head away coldly. Che Zi thought about it and decided to use a compromise. He said, since this person can kill Gua and Pang, he's definitely not someone easy to deal with. Even if we can't rope him in, we should try our best not to offend him. Since he wants to refine that treasure, why don't we lend him the earthly fire heavenly cauldron? It's not something that can be done overnight. As for the matter of asking him to help, we can discuss it later. Chapter 453. Since Zhang Yan was able to kill both Gua and Pang, it was obvious that his magical powers were not ordinary and could not be underestimated. Even the three elders of the Zhenluo Union had to give him face. Even if they could not use him to help the Union, they did not want to offend him over such a small matter. After the three of them came to a conclusion, Che Zi ordered someone to send a message to him, agreeing to lend the earthly fire heavenly cauldron to him. At the same time, he also sent a Taoist child to Wei Shudan and Liang Changgong to pass down a decree, ordering the two to help Zhang Yan forge the treasure together and not to disobey. After Liang Changgong received the decree, he did not object. Although Wei Shudan was a little dissatisfied, he was able to reach his current position because the Union did their best to nurture him. How would he dare to disobey the orders of the elders? He also hurriedly agreed. However, he hadn't seen Zhang Yan before this, so he didn't know exactly what sort of magic treasure material he wanted to refine. At this moment, he didn't care about face any longer and took the initiative to go to the Liang estate, and only after he inquired about it did he obtain an understanding. Although the two of them were experts in forging, treasures like the remains of a great demon were hard to find in the world and they had never forged it before. If there was any damage during the forging process, neither of them could afford to bear the responsibility. Therefore, they had to do their best. After communicating for a while, the two of them ordered their disciples to split up and buy the treasures they needed. Because they needed a lot of things, some of them had to go to Pingdong and deep in the mountains and ravines to collect. Therefore, the two mansions had a total of more than 100 disciples running to and fro. Other matters were delayed. This movement was huge and everyone in the Zhenluo Union knew that the two grandmasters were going to forge a treasure together. Immediately, it caused quite a commotion. After the news spread, many forging experts came from far away just to observe the two's forging methods. When Zhang Yan found out, he was not surprised. He already knew in his heart that forging a good treasure was not something that could be done in a year and a half. In such a long period of time, and at the same time, with the help of the earthly fire heavenly cauldron, it was impossible to hide it from others. Therefore, when the treasure was being forged, he still needed to watch from the side. This was to prevent any mistakes from happening. If someone was secretly coveting it, there was no need to think too much. They could only kill it. Ever since he entered this island, he had not gone out. He had only focused on cultivating in the Tao Palace, waiting for the right time to refine treasures. With his current level of cultivation, absorbing ordinary spiritual qi was no longer of much benefit to his cultivation. Fortunately, this island was located at the top of the clouds. There was a mountain peak that broke through the extreme heavens, drawing in the heroic heavenly sand from beyond the heavens, enough for him to cultivate. That day, he woke up from his meditative state as usual. When he was about to start studying the 5 elements escape technique, he suddenly heard a sound coming from outside. Is Zhenren Zhang here? I am Liang Changgong, and I would like to see you, immortal. Zhang Yan became spirited and said with a smile, so it's fellow Taoist Liang who has come to visit. Please come in and talk. Liang Changgong stepped inside. This time, he was not alone. There was another cloth-robed elder beside him. After seeing Zhang Yan, he took the initiative to step forward and clasped his hands, saying loudly, "Greetings, Taoist Zhang. I am Wei Shuden." "Greetings." Zhang Yan saw that he was tall and had arms that reached his knees. His face was fair and beardless, his head was like a sharp awl, and his long hair draped over his shoulders. His appearance and dressing were different from ordinary people, so he subconsciously took a few more looks and said, "So you are fellow Taoist Wei. I have long heard of your name. I will have to trouble the two of you to refine the treasures this time." Wei Shuden hurriedly said, "What are you saying, Taoist Zhang? I dare not do my best." Liang Changgong said, "You are too polite, Taoist Zhang. The two of us came here today for this matter. Now that all the treasures are ready, we just don't know when is the best time to open the furnace?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and asked, "Is there a reason for this?" Liang Changgong replied, "If it's a normal furnace, it still needs to be in accordance with the time and sacrifice demons, but the earth fire heavenly furnace doesn't need to be so particular. However, the first fire requires Taoist Zhang to use his own blood as a sacrifice. After the furnace fire burns for 7 days, the two of us can start refining it." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If that's the case, there's no time like the present. I will now follow the two of you to open the furnace fire." He rolled up his sleeves and wrapped up a strong current. The two of them were brought in by him and flew through the air, leaving Feiyu Taoist Palace in the blink of an eye. The place where the earth fire heavenly furnace was located was in Mount Luchi, 500 miles away from Twin Moon Peak. To prevent intruders from trespassing, there were also sky lanterns hung around the area and disciples were arranged to patrol day and night. In just a moment, Zhang Yan arrived at the mountain. He retracted the strong current and the three of them landed on a mound. Liang Changgong pointed to the front and said, "Taoist Zhang, is this earth fire heavenly furnace to your liking?" Zhang Yan looked into the distance and saw a sinkhole that was thousands of hectares in size. There were more than 100 earth breath fire veins under the heavenly furnace, surrounded by white soil paste to prevent the fire from leaking out. The inside was separated by stones like a cage, and there were a total of 365 rooms, which corresponded to the number of heavenly cycles. When refining a transcendent artifact, the size of the treasured materials could be changed at will. However, even Yuanian cultivators would find it difficult to change the landscape of a mountain. This heavenly furnace was created by the joint efforts of 2 grotto heavens. These 2 great cultivators were a pair of Tao companions. Their original sect had long been annihilated by the Shaoqing sect, so they retreated to the land of Pingxi. After a few decades, hundreds of cultivators came here and established the Zhenluo Union, worshipping the 2 of them. Now that hundreds of years had passed, one of the grotto heavens had passed away, and the other was also near the end of his lifespan. If the Zhenluo Union was not at that critical juncture of life and death, they probably wouldn't have appeared. At this moment, there was a movement in the sky, and several people dressed in golden robes came from afar. They stood in the clouds and looked down. Liang Changgong glanced over and said in surprise, "Brother Wei, look at that person. Is he Hua Zhaofang from the Golden Soaring sect?" Wei Shuden looked up and exclaimed in surprise, "It's him, why is he here too?" Zhang Yan turned around and asked, "Do the two of you know this person?" Liang Changgong replied respectfully, "This person is an expert in refining artifacts from the Pingdong Golden Soaring sect. In terms of ability, he's probably not inferior to us." Wei Shuden shook his head and sighed. "We don't know what treasure we're going to refine, but we definitely can't hide it from this person." They understood that although the news of the two of them working together to refine a transcendent artifact had spread far and wide, outsiders only knew a little about it. No one knew what exactly they were going to refine. However, Hua Xiaofang was different. Just from the many precious materials they bought, it could be seen that the refinement this time was not comparable to the previous ones. At this moment, the leader of the group in the clouds also noticed Zhang Yan and the others. He immediately recognized Liang Changgong and Wei Shuden, but he had no intention of coming down to greet them. After watching for a while, he left. Zhang Yan looked in the direction where those people went and revealed a thoughtful expression. After a while, he looked away just now. At the same time, in the Feiyu Taoist Palace, Shang Teng sat cross-legged on a cattail hassock with a gloomy expression. He seemed to be thinking about an extremely difficult matter. In the end, he snorted heavily and looked up at the sky. He muttered to himself, "If I don't accept the gift of heaven, I'll be punished instead." He flicked his sleeve and threw out a talisman. He ordered the Taoist boy beside him, "Boy, take my talisman and summon Li Hua." The boy received his order and left. In less than the time for an incense stick to burn, a gorgeous young woman arrived in the hall and knelt on the ground. "Li Hua greets the ancestor." Shang Teng said in a low voice, "Get up. You're the most intelligent and quick-witted amongst the juniors in the clan. I have something for you to do now." Shang Li was still knelt on the ground and said, "Please instruct me, ancestor." Shang Teng nodded with satisfaction and said, "You're able to come up." Since he joined the Zhenluo alliance 400 years ago, his juniors and disciples had spread out here. Now, it had become one of the top clans on Twin Moon Peak. There were over 10,000 disciples in the Shang clan, but only a few of them were able to catch his attention, and Shang Liwa was one of them. Moreover, this woman was extremely talented in the path of cultivation. She'd already cultivated to the enlightened Qi realm at the age of 17, and her future was limitless. Shang Lihua stood up and walked forward. When she came close, Shang Teng whispered a few words, and then he took out a sleeve pouch and gave it to her. "All my instructions are in there. You can open it after you're done, and you'll know what to do next." Shang Lihua took it with both hands and said respectfully, "Lihua will not let you down." Shang Teng stroked his beard and smiled, "All right, go." After Shang Lihua left the palace and returned to the residence, she immediately summoned a few strong men and maidservants. They got on the carriage and headed towards Mount Deer Chi. The group of people set off at the end of the 5 o'clock. Just now, they'd arrived at the foot of the mountain. The maidservant outside the carriage asked softly, "Wife, is this place okay?" Shang Lihua lifted the curtain and walked out. She took a look and circled around before saying, "If we go any further, we'll arouse suspicion. Let's go here." The maidservant waved her hand and a strong man came out with an object. It was about 2 feet high and wrapped in yellow silk, but it was not clear what it was. 2 servants took the shovel and walked to the front and started digging the soil. They were all used to doing farm work, so it didn't take long for them to dig a hole that could fit a jar. They then carefully buried the object and covered it with soil, trying to compact it. Shang Lihua looked again and saw that there were no flaws, so she said, "Let's go." They came by carriage and didn't fly. They didn't stay for long before they left, so they didn't attract the attention of the patrolling disciples. The carriages went south for dozens of miles. After passing a mountain ridge, Shang Lihua opened the sleeve bag in the carriage and took out a letter according to Shang Teng's instructions. After opening it and reading it, her expression changed slightly, but she quickly calmed down. She took out a small sword from the bag and chanted a few incantations. Finally, she said, "Go." A silver light flashed and the small sword flew out of the carriage. Screams of agony could be heard from outside, but after a while, it quieted down. Shang Lihua stepped out of the carriage and looked around. She saw that all the maidservants and strong men were killed and turned into a pool of thick blood. She took a deep breath and took out another item. She tossed it on the ground, and a cloud of smoke dissipated, revealing a flying cloud carriage. She took 3 steps and 2 steps and got on the carriage. After sitting down, she picked up the talisman and shook it. The carriage shook lightly and flew into the clouds. It turned into a ray of moonlight and flew towards the east. Chapter 454. Within the earthly fire heavenly cauldron, flames raged and flames raged. Among the hundreds of earthly fire veins, 72 of them had already been activated by Liang and Wei with the help of the banners, emitting blazing flames that surged into the sky. Even from 100 miles away, one could see streaks of red light flashing and soaring. The disciples of Zhenluo Union hadn't seen such a scene for many years, so they couldn't help but stop and watch. Even the disciples on duty outside the heavenly cauldron watched with interest. However, the realm guarding formation was already activated, so they weren't afraid of outsiders causing trouble. Liang and Wei sat in front of the north and south fire vents with 5 colored banners behind them. At this moment, they each controlled the 36 earth veins and slowly activated the fire qi. This fire was divided into yin and yang qi. Due to the circulation of the earth veins, it constantly changed. The two had to carefully maintain the balance of yin and yang. Otherwise, if the qi veins became chaotic, the cave would collapse. If a blacksmith only had a normal cauldron, no matter how high their cultivation was, they wouldn't be able to last for several years without rest. At most, they would be able to create a talisman. What was left was to slowly nurture it in one's acupuncture points, like training. First, the impurities would be absorbed, then the essence would be refined. When the talisman was flawless, only then could it give birth to true consciousness and increase in rank. However, using a human body to nurture a talisman required a long time. At least a few hundred years, at most 1,000 years. To create a profound talisman, who knew how much hard work was needed? With the earth fire heavenly cauldron, the talisman refiner didn't need to worry about running out of energy. They could use all their methods and finish everything they needed to do inside the heavenly cauldron. This way, after a cultivator obtained a talisman, they could cultivate true consciousness in an extremely short amount of time. If they were lucky, they could even create a true talisman. Zhang Yan sat on the stone platform next to the heavenly cauldron, paying attention to the changes inside the cauldron, waiting for the time to sacrifice the blood to the cauldron. The sun rose and the moon set. An entire day passed. When it was early in the morning, the two saw that they had attracted enough earth fire. At the same time, they shouted and pulled out a blue banner behind them. Waving it, a cool breeze came from the banner and floated into the field. It filled the fire door and sealed it. Liang Changgong saw that the fire was ready and said loudly, "Spiritual Master Zhang, the time has come. The time has come. You can use your essence blood to sacrifice to the furnace." Without hesitation, Zhang Yan bit the tip of his tongue and spat 3 mouthfuls of blood into it. Then, without looking at the results, he took a few pills and swallowed them. Then, he closed his eyes and meditated. Even with his profound cultivation, spitting out 3 mouthfuls of blood essence still consumed a lot of vitality. His face was slightly pale. Liang and Wei Xiaobao saw that the flames suddenly dimmed down, and then they looked at the situation. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. The two of them were also secretly speechless. They didn't expect that Zhang Yan's profound qi was so huge and pure that it could even suppress the power of the earth fire. Moreover, looking at the situation, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to refine it for a while. About 2 hours passed. Just now, the fire was slowly reigniting. The two of them heaved a sigh of relief and smiled bitterly at each other. The refining of treasures in the Middle Pillar continent was not like the other continents, where the treasures would only recognize their master after the refinement was completed. Instead, they paid particular attention to the treasure's recognition of their master when the furnace was opened. This action was related to the success or failure of the subsequent techniques, so the blood sacrifice in the fire was especially important. If the two of them had delayed a little more. If they couldn't completely refine the 3 mouthfuls of blood essence, they would probably have to start the fire again. Then, they would have to start all over again and the 3 mouthfuls of blood essence would have been wasted. The first time they worked together to refine a treasure, it was for a Yuanying spiritual master. However, at that time, they didn't have much experience. At that time, the fire was too big, causing the cultivator to spit out several mouthfuls of blood essence. However, the fire didn't change at all. Afterwards, he almost lost half his life and barely managed to pass it. Thus, this time, they were afraid that Zhang Yan didn't have enough blood essence. Based on their previous experience, they suppressed the fire a little. However, they didn't expect that Zhang Yan also cultivated the divine contract. He was a strength cultivator and also had a grade 1 core. His profound qi was so huge that it was beyond their imagination. This sudden change almost caused them to fail. After resting for a while, Zhang Yan also recovered from the loss of his profound qi. Seeing that the two of them were calm and there didn't seem to be anything wrong, he sat there without moving. After 7 days, this ball of fire was completely tamed by Liang and Wei. Almost at the same time, they pulled out the red banners behind them, waved them, and pointed them down. The fire crouched on the ground and obediently stopped moving. It was no longer as tyrannical and imposing as before. The two of them looked at each other and saw a hint of admiration in each other's eyes. When they used the heavenly cauldron in the past, even with the teachings of their masters, it took them a whole half a month to suppress the fire, leaving them in a difficult situation. Today, they were so relaxed, not only because their cultivation had improved, but also because they went back and thought about it repeatedly, trying to improve on their mistakes. Otherwise, if one of the two of them was half a step behind, they would have to spend a lot more time. Liang Changgong turned around and looked at Zhang Yan. He cupped his hands and said, "Spiritual Master Zhang, the fire is ready. Now we can ask the black tortoise to shed its shell." Zhang Yan nodded and took out the tortoise shell from his sleeve. He threw it down and it fell into the pit of unknown depth. Liang and Wei saw it and shouted. They waved the red banners together. With a whoosh, both of them separated a yin fire and a yang fire from their banners. They supported the tortoise shell and slowly descended. When they reached 90 feet, Liang Changgong kept the yang fire and replaced it with the yin fire. Wei Shudan kept the yin fire and replaced it with the yang fire. Like this, every 90 feet, they would rotate and replace it. After about 36 times, the black tortoise shell had already sunk into the depths of the pit. The two of them stuck the red banners into the ground and took out the yellow banners from behind them. With a wave, countless white stones flew up like young swallows returning to the forest. They gathered at one place and in an instant, they formed a circle around the tortoise shell. They piled up like a mound and looked like a well railing. Wei Shudan took the time to glance at the top of his head. There were more than 100 disciples on flying boats wandering back and forth. He said loudly, "What are you guys doing there? What did I tell you before? Why aren't you moving?" Hearing his order, these disciples came to their senses. They hurriedly threw the treasured materials that they had prepared in the flying boats down. In the blink of an eye, they were thrown into the bottomless pit. When all the treasured materials on the flying boats had been thrown in, the disciples turned the flying boats around and retreated in an orderly manner. The area was immediately empty. Liang and Wei Shudan pulled out the green banners and waved them lightly. Like a fire opening spewing smoke, the flames suddenly shot up to a height of several tens of feet, shaking the pit to the point that it trembled. Streams of red and dazzling liquid seeped out from the ground and accumulated thicker and thicker. It slowly rose from the pit made of white stones and drowned the black tortoise shell and the treasured materials. When it was about to overflow, Liang Changgong said, "Brother Wei, are you going to do the cover pass, or am I going to do it?" Wei Shudan replied with a smile, "Brother Liang, there's no need to be modest. You can go first this time. The next pass will have to depend on me." Liang Changgong laughed and said, "Then I won't refuse." He picked up the yellow banners and pointed downward. In an instant, a gust of wind swept up, and a large amount of golden sand flew up and filled the pit. After an hour, there was no more movement in the pit. The fire and wind stopped, as if nothing had happened. The two of them came down from the rocks with relaxed expressions. With a leap, they came to stand beside Zhang Yan. Liang Changgong first wiped the sweat on his forehead, then he cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Zhang, these treasured materials are extremely difficult to refine. They need at least 8 months to warm and nourish before they can be opened again. This place is protected by a formation, so there's no need for you to stay here. You can come back when the time comes." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "When I was in the Donghua continent, the method of refining treasures I saw was completely different from this. Today, my horizons have been broadened." Wei Shudan smiled and said, "Jinren Zhang, you may not know, but in these 10 days, we actually haven't really started the sacrificial refining of the treasured weapons." Seeing Zhang Yan's slightly surprised expression, Liang Changgong was afraid that he would misunderstand, so he explained, "Jinren Zhang, this method is called cover the ground fire cage. When using this method, you need to block the exit of the fire, leaving only a few secret holes. Through this method, the treasured materials can be smelted to remove impurities and purify. If the vessel is good, it can absorb all of its qi. After 81 days, the soil will be dug out. Repeat this a few times, and the treasured weapons can be upgraded again." Zhang Yan couldn't help but have a strange look in his eyes. He said, "Oh? The two of you actually have this kind of ability?" The tortoise shell was originally the remains of a grotto heaven great demon, and it was already a rare item in the world. However, according to what the two of them said, they could actually refine it again and make it better than before. This was something he had never thought of before. Speaking of his own ability, Liang Changgong also showed off and said, "Jinren Zhang, everything in the world has its use. It's not that the rarer the better, but how to use it properly. It's like those who don't understand only know how to find a rare treasure, and then knock it a little, and then think that it has become a treasure. However, they don't know that this is just superficial work, and they only rely on the original nature of the treasured materials. What kind of ability is this? Is this also worthy of being called an expert in refining weapons?" In the end, his tone was slightly disdainful. At this moment, Wei Shudan also proudly said, "If you only have this kind of ability, what's the use of us? Any of our disciples can be qualified, and it seems that you can create something out of nothing and refine the treasured materials, making them far better than what they originally were. Just now, we are showing our ability." Zhang Yan listened and nodded incessantly. If the two of them could really do this, they did indeed have the qualifications to say such words. However, Wei Shudan and Liang Changgong had forgotten that the reason they were able to do this was because the two of them had extraordinary refining skills, but the refiners of other continents were not stupid. The reason they could not do this was not because of their own fault, but because they could not find enough precious materials. It was only because the Central Pillar continent was rich that they could afford to spend so much money. It was like the last layer of fine sand that they covered was the dust of the stellar heroes that had settled in the soil for tens of thousands of years. After combining with the qi of the earth, it turned into fine sand. As for the refining weapons of other continents, where could they find such good materials? They were all replaced by mud and stone. Of course they could not be compared to them. Only in this stage, what kind of treasured materials to put in, what time to put in, how many yin-yang flames to light, these were the skills that were passed down from generation to generation in the Central Pillar continent. Outsiders had no way of knowing. Chapter 455. Royal Formation Mountain, the headquarters of the Xian sect. The leader of the Lai Xian clan was a junior of the human race on the E Cliff. However, this person only focused on cultivating and comprehending the Tao. He never cared about the affairs of the clan. Therefore, all the mundane affairs were handled by the 9 elders. At this moment, there were 6 Yuanying elders sitting in the hall. The great elder, old Ram Sheng, sat at the head of the altar. He looked to be in his 80s, with white hair and a youthful complexion. He wore a deep purple robe of auspicious cranes soaring through the clouds, a crown on his head, and a rui branch in his hand. His eyes glowed, and he had an awe-inspiring aura. After a while, he said slowly, "Junior apprentice brother Shah is not here yet?" A blue-robed Taoist on the right stood up and bowed, saying, "Uncle Master Shah said that he will arrive at the latest at 9 o'clock. There's still a quarter of an hour left. Why don't Uncle Master wait a little longer?" "All right, we'll do as Marshal Nephew Rui says. Let's wait a little longer." Gong Yangsheng readily accepted the advice and said with a smile. However, there were people below who were dissatisfied and said, "May I know why Marshal Uncle has gathered us? If it's not something important, why don't you say it earlier so that we don't have to waste time here?" The person who spoke was a young man. His hair was tied into a bun, and he wore short-sleeved casual clothes with a colorful silk robe draped over him. There was an exquisite jade pendant hanging from his waist, and he wore dark-colored cloud boots. He held a 7-star magic sword in his hand, and he pressed it against his knees. His eyes were filled with an indescribable sharp light. The Lai Xian order had a total of 8 branch altars. Normally, each Yuanin cultivator would oversee an area. This person was called Yi Jiliu, and he was the altar master of the wave-shaking altar. Apart from the great elder, Gong Yangsheng, his cultivation could be considered outstanding here. Gong Yangsheng's self-restraint was very good. His martial nephew spoke so rudely. He didn't get angry and only said, "Martial nephew, don't be anxious. When everyone is here, I will speak." After waiting for another moment, when Yi Jiliu felt that his patience had reached its limit, a beam of light flew in from outside the hall and landed in the hall. It was a sloppy Taoist. His clothes were tattered and his face was covered in dust. His toes were exposed through the holes in his boots. However, the enlightened masters were already used to this. One of them complained, "Uncle Shah, we have to wait for you every time." Taoist Shah laughed and bowed to the 6 Zenrins, saying, "I'm late by a step, please forgive me, please forgive me." He then casually bowed to Gong Yangsheng and called him Shixiang. That was it. "Since Junior Marshal Brother is here, please take your seat. I still have something to say." "I'm afraid Marshal Nephew Yi can't wait any longer." Taoist Shah hastily went to his seat, then smiled and cupped his fists at a fellow disciple sitting next to him. Only then did he sit down. But after he sat down, he was restless. He took off his old boots, sniffed them, threw them aside, and began to rub his feet. Immediately, a strange smell wafted out. Yi Jiliu happened to be right below him. He could not help but reveal a hint of disgust on his face. He turned his body to the side and cast a spell to seal his nose aperture. The Sand Taoist suddenly turned around. Giving him a mischievous smile, Yi Jiliu could not help but snort. At this time, the voice of Ram Xing came from the high platform. "A few days ago, there was a piece of news from the Double Moon Peak." Taoist Sand couldn't help but stop his movements and reveal an attentive expression. Twin Moon Peak was the most important place of Zhenluo Union. If there was news from there, it would definitely be very important. He then heard Ram Xing continue, "I heard that the person who stole our sect's divine object is a heavenly demon. He's currently on the Double Moon Peak." Yi Jiliu's eyes turned cold. "Are you referring to Priest Zhang who killed Senior Brother Gua and Senior Brother Peng?" "Yes, it is him," Gong Yangsheng sighed. Upon hearing that it was this person, everyone's expressions turned solemn. Yi Jiliu snorted a few times and glanced at Taoist Shah and the other 2 Taoists before saying, "Junior Uncle Shah, Junior Sister Tan, Junior Brother Gao, do you have anything to say?" Junior Brother Gao was a handsome man wearing a silver robe and a tall crown. Junior Sister Tan looked like she was in her 30s. She had a well-developed figure and wore light makeup. They and Taoist Shah were the 3 people who were originally stationed in Pingxi. After learning that Gua and Senior Brother Pang were killed, they only thought about protecting themselves and did not do anything. Hearing Yi Jiliu's slightly sarcastic words, Taoist Shah remained calm. Tan and Gao, on the other hand, revealed an unnatural expression. After all, they did not do anything when their fellow disciples were killed. Even if they had a good reason, it was not something to be proud of. Seeing that the 2 of them were embarrassed, the blue-robed Taoist hurriedly tried to smooth things over. That day, Senior Uncle Shah and the others had no other choice. Kunyu is protected by a great formation. If no one led the way, it would not have been possible to break through in a day or 2. Moreover, the branch altars cannot be left so easily. They were thinking of the bigger picture. Junior brother Yi, please don't blame them. Yi Jiliu did not continue to argue. He raised the magic sword in his hand and said with a murderous tone, I heard that Taoist Zhang's Dao technique is strange. I've long wanted to meet him. Senior Uncle Gong Yang, are you sending us to kill this person? Junior brother Tan suddenly said, Senior Uncle Gong Yang, the Twin Moon Peak can be considered the headquarters of the Zhenluo Alliance. In terms of strength, this alliance is actually far above our sect. It's only because of internal discord that our sect managed to take advantage of this loophole. However, if we go to that place, we must be cautious. His words immediately attracted the agreement of the others. Taoist Sha also nodded repeatedly. Yi Jiliu sneered and said, Are you all afraid? It's all right. I, Yi Jiliu, am willing to go alone and cut off this person's head. I'll enshrine it in front of the ancestral god statue. Let's see if someone is embarrassed then. At the end of his words, he cast a glance at Taoist Sha's face. Taoist Sha was an extremely thick-skinned person. He chuckled and only treated Yi Jiliu's words as a gentle breeze. Gong Yang Sheng praised, Junior brother Ye's courage is commendable. This person must be killed. However, the reason why I called everyone here today is not just for this person. It's for the divine beast's egg. This item concerns the fate of our sect for thousands of years. No matter what, we must find a way to take it back. Junior sister Tan's eyes flickered as she asked, Senior uncle, is this item really in this person's hands? To the left of Gong Yang Sheng, there was a bald Daoran with a chin like a spoon and a face with brown stripes. He answered, Junior sister Tan, this person has not returned to the East Flower continent. Other than the Twin Moon Peak, he has not been to any other place. The divine beast's egg should still be in his hands. This bald Doran's words seemed to be very authoritative. After hearing it, Junior sister Tan nodded and said no more. Yi Jiliu's sharp eyes stared at Gong Yangsheng again. Martial uncle, I'm willing to make a trip to the Twin Moon's Peak to retrieve the divine beast's egg for our divine church. However, I also know that I'm afraid that I can't do it alone. Martial uncle, please send another person to accompany me. That way, I'll be more confident. Gong Yangsheng let out a laugh that shook the hall. However, his words were shocking. This trip to the Twin Moon Peak is not a matter of 1 or 2 people. The 7 of us must go together. Only then will we have the highest chance of success. As soon as these words came out, there was a burst of exclamation. The blue-robed Taoist opened his hands and asked in surprise, Senior uncle, if we all go to the Twin Moon Peak, who will guard the headquarters? Gong Yangsheng smiled and said, This is not difficult. We can make arrangements in advance and create the illusion that we are all in the headquarters to confuse the Qingshi Temple and the Jinling sect. With the help of the ancestral statue and the tactical formation, even if there is a large-scale attack, it will not be broken in 10 days. Besides, with the help of the golden bridge of our sect, we can travel thousands of miles in an instant. After we kill this person together, we can return to the headquarters in time. If everything goes well, I'm afraid that the disciples of the 2 sects will not be aware of it and we will return. The blue-robed Taoist murmured, 7 people, that is the full strength of our Lai Xian sect. Gong Yangsheng squinted and corrected, Junior brother Chu, you have missed 1 person. The blue-robed Taoist was stunned for a moment. Then he patted his forehead and said, Yes, how could I have missed him? Junior sister Tan thought for a moment and said, Senior uncle, it's not that I want to say too much, but with 8 people against 1 person, although it is foolproof, is it making a fuss? Gong Yangsheng looked serious and said, Even a lion will use its full strength to catch a rabbit. That Taoist Zhang can kill the 2 junior nephews Gua and Pang, which means that his magical power is extremely powerful and must not be underestimated. Moreover, after we get the divine beast egg, our sect will prosper greatly. How can you say that it is making a fuss? Yi Jiliu was excited and said, Then what are we waiting for? Senior uncle, when do we start? I am willing to take the lead. At this time, the bald Daoran slowly said, Junior brother Yi, don't be impatient. Today, Senior Uncle Gong Yang only summoned you to discuss this matter. This matter still needs to be carefully arranged. In my opinion, 3 or 4 years should be enough. What? 3 or 4 years? When Yi Jiliu heard this, his eyebrows trembled and he couldn't help but jump up. That person ran away long ago. Gong Yangsheng pressed his hand down and said, Junior nephew Yi, sit down and let's talk. Don't worry. That Taoist Zhang is currently refining a treasure on Twin Moon Peak. Rumor has it that this treasure is made by Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan together, and they also bought a lot of precious materials. I have already asked the refining experts in the sect, and they said that it is not something that can be completed in a hurry in 3 to 5 years, so there is no need to be impatient. Yi Jiliu thought for a moment, then let out a and sat down resentfully. The blue-robed Taoist was not so optimistic. He carefully calculated for a while and looked at the bald Daoren, saying, 3 to 4 years of arrangement, senior brother who is actually still not enough. What kind of place is Twin Moon Peak? It is not a place that we can go just because we want to. If we are not careful, the 13 elders of Zhenluo League will come together, and with the help of the formation of Twin Moon Peak, they can definitely kill all of us. Taoist Sha suddenly said, Senior brother, you seem to have forgotten someone. Gong Yangsheng looked over and asked in a deep voice, Who? Taoist Sha said lightly, Cheng Ru, Spiritual Master Cheng. As soon as this name was said, a few people's expressions changed. Cheng Ru was the name of the spiritual master behind Zhenluo League. Although she had not shown herself for a long time, as long as she was in Zhenluo League, they would never be able to leave Twin Moon Peak safely. Gong Yangsheng smiled and said, Junior brother's concern is reasonable. Taoist Sha's expression changed, and he asked in surprise, Could it be that senior brother has already made arrangements? Gong Yangsheng looked at everyone's faces, and suddenly raised his hand to salute, saying, Everyone, don't worry. I have already asked that person to come out, and this spiritual master Cheng will definitely not come out to stop our sex people. That person? Everyone immediately realized who Gong Yangsheng was talking about. While fear appeared in their eyes, their hearts also calmed down. Taoist Sha smiled bitterly and said, Since that person is willing to come out, that is for the best. However, I am afraid that the offerings that our sect will send will increase again. Chapter 456. Ever since the heavenly furnace was sealed, the black tortoise's metamorphosis was slowly nurtured inside. Zhang Yan didn't have to spend too much energy for now. During the day, he would refine Gang Ing in the Feiyu Taoist Palace, and at night, he would come to the earthly fire heavenly furnace to guard and deduce the 5 elements escape technique. He would go back and forth between these 2 places every day. After 3 months, Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan came to see him together. After exchanging greetings, Liang Changgong first said, Jinren Zhang, in 5 months, we will open the furnace for the 2nd time. But this time, it's a little different. Not only do we need to draw in the earth qi, but we also need to change the earth fire to open fire. However, the wood used as firewood is somewhat particular. It's divided into 6 grades, and the higher the grade, the purer the fire. I'm here to ask Jinren Zhang, what should we use? Zhang Yan raised his brows and said, I've already said that I'll naturally choose the best materials. Why do you have to ask me again, fellow Taoist Liang? Liang Changgong hesitated for a while and finally said, To be honest, this treasure needs at least 4 years of sacrificial refining, which means at least 24 azure wood will be used. However, this wood is too rare, and the number of spirit shells needed is not small. Because the 2 of us have filled in a lot of precious materials, we've already used up a lot of our savings. If we want to buy this wood again, it's a little difficult, so... Zhang Yan raised his head and glanced at the 2 of them. Wei Shudan couldn't help but avoid his gaze, and Liang Changgong lowered his head. He was surprised. Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan weren't scholars. Even if spirit shells were not enough, they should have told him long ago. Why did this suddenly pop up now? He wouldn't believe that there was nothing strange behind this. However, he wasn't in the mood to care about the details. As long as the treasure was successfully refined, spirit shells were nothing. His expression was indifferent and he asked, How many spirit shells do I need? Liang Changgong opened his thumb and food, carefully counting, and said, "If it's that azure wood, then it'll need 80,000 spirit shells." After a pause, he added, "I've discussed with Wei Shudan, and we think that if Shinran feels that it's not enough, we can use other things instead." 80,000 spirit shells was not a small number even in the Central Pillar continent. Zhang Yan didn't even frown. He tossed out a sleeve and said, "There are 100,000 spirit shells in here. Use them first. If it's not enough, come back to me." Liang Changgong couldn't help but be startled. Then there was no joy on his face. Instead, his face turned pale. He took the sleeve bag and opened it. He saw that the spirit shells inside were all high-grade. If he exchanged them for low-grade spirit shells, it would be enough to trade for 3. Not only would it be enough to buy the azure wood, but it would also be enough to buy the treasures from before. He trembled slightly and forced himself to calm down. He stood up and bowed. "Then we'll take our leave first." Zhang Yan didn't stand up. He returned the salute and said, "I won't be sending you off." When the two of them walked out, Liang Changgong let out a sigh and grumbled, "Brother Wei, look, I've told you this method won't work. Taoist Zhang is from a big sect, so how can he not take out several tens of thousands of spirit shells? Now that we have the spirit shells, we don't know where to find the azure wood." Wei Shudan stroked his beard and smiled bitterly. "It's my fault this time. I thought that by saying this, Taoist Zhang would be able to use other things to replace the spirit shells. I didn't expect Taoist Zhang to be so wealthy. It's hard for me to talk about the inside story now." Liang Changgong angrily said, "If that person didn't buy all the azure wood I had my eyes on, we wouldn't be in such a predicament. How hateful! Every single one of these azure trees had a lifespan of 30,000 years. Only the Middle Pillar continent could grow to such an age. If it was any other place, it would have been chopped down and refined into a transcendent treasure before it could fully mature. But even so, it was extremely rare and difficult to find. The azure wood that Liang Changgong had his eyes on was a treasure of someone else. They had already agreed on it, but a few days ago, when he excitedly ran over, he said that it had been taken away by someone else. This was tantamount to a blow to his head. If he failed to refine the treasure, it would be hard for him to explain to Zhang Yan. Wei Shudan frowned and thought for a moment. "There's still some time left. I'll go somewhere else to think of a way to see if I can find this wood. Even if I can find 6 of them, it'll be enough for a year. I'll slowly look for them later. What do you think?" Liang Changgong's face was full of worry. "What if I still can't find it by then?" Wei Shudan didn't know how to answer and sighed. "I'll drag it out for as long as I can." He didn't say anything else and just bowed to him. Then he flew up into the clouds and disappeared in a moment. Liang Changgong sighed and also returned to his residence. However, the two of them thought that they had covered up this matter. They did not know that Zhang Yan had already seen some clues from their words and expressions. Hence, he paid special attention to the words that the two of them said when they left the mansion. Everything that they said when they left the mansion was transmitted into his ears. He thought for a moment and already had a plan. He called the Taoist boy outside the door and said, "That day, I met Taoist Hua from the Golden Soaring sect and felt that we were on good terms. We agreed to visit another day. May I know where he is now?" The Taoist boy didn't suspect anything and said, "Taoist Hua lives in the East Court. The side palace is not far from here. Do you need me to bring you there?" Zhang Yan smiled. "It's just a few steps away. I don't need you to accompany me. Go ahead." After dismissing the Taoist boy, he waved his sleeves and left the palace. He turned into a golden light and flew towards the East Court. In a flash, he landed in front of the side palace. The disciple guarding the door wasn't from the Tao Palace but from the Golden Soaring sect. When he saw Zhang Yan, he thought that he was an elder from the Zhenluo League. He bowed and said, "May I know which elder is here? I'll go and report it." Zhang Yan said, "I, Zhang Yan, would like to see Taoist Hua." The disciple couldn't help but look surprised. Obviously, he had heard of Zhang Yan's reputation. He hurriedly bowed to him and hurriedly went inside. After a while, The middle door opened and a haggard-looking Daoran with sparse hair and beard walked out. Judging from his aura, his cultivation was only at the core transformation realm. The person saw Zhang Yan and hurriedly took 2 steps forward. He bowed and said, "It really is Jinren Zhang. Hua Xiaofang greets you. Please come inside." Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony. He nodded and walked inside. When they reached the hall, Hua Xiaofang first invited Zhang Yan to sit down. Then, he sat down and said, "May I know why Jinren is here?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Taoist Hua, why do you ask when you already know the answer? I'm here for the 10,000-year-old verdant wood." Hua Xiaofang was slightly startled. Then he smiled and said, "Did Taoist Wei and Taoist Liang say that Jinren knows about it?" Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He said, "That verdant would just happen to be used by I, and it was bought by someone else. The timing was so ingenious. This is definitely not the act of a layman. Taoist Liang and Taoist Wei are not low in the league. Other than Taoist Hua from the Golden Soaring sect, I really can't think of anyone else who can make them so wary." Hua Xiaofang revealed a look of surprise. Then he lowered his head and thought for a while. Then he slowly raised his head and said, "Jinren, please allow me to report. There's another story behind this. I didn't mean to make things difficult for Jinren." Zhang Yan looked at him and waited for him to continue. Hua Xiaofang sighed and said, "To be honest, Jinren Zhang, Daoran only has 20 years left to live. It's just that I've been obsessed with the art of refining and have always wanted to compile a treasure record of refining weapons. However, due to the rules of the sect, I've only been working behind closed doors. I've never sparred with my fellow Taoists here. Today, I heard that Taoist Liang and Taoist Wei were refining treasures. Just from the treasures alone, I can tell that they're not ordinary items. Thus, I was excited and wanted to come here to observe. However, I was afraid that the 2 Taoists wouldn't allow me, so I came up with this plan. I really don't want to make things difficult for Jinren." He stood up and bowed solemnly. He said, "I've sinned, please forgive me, Jinren." Feiyu Taoist Palace J.E. put down the letter and fell into deep thought. Ever since the deaths of Guo and Pang, the Lai Xian sect had always been on the defensive in Pingxi. However, in recent days, they've been acting unusually. They've been sending out disciples to invade the Zhenluo Union's territory. There were even a few elders in the sect, but no one knew what they were up to. This letter came from his good friend, Elder Yao. It mentioned that at least 3 Jinren from the Lai Xian sect had attacked the place where he was stationed. Elder Che shook his head. Actually, he had already advised his good friend to return to the Twin Moon Peak. Although the land outside the mountain was vast, there were only nomadic settlements and barbarians living there. The population was not more than 10,000. Even if they were all thrown to the Lai Xian sect, it wouldn't hurt their foundation. Moreover, the Lai Xian sect in Pingdong was hindered by Qingshi Temple and Jinling sect. After a long time, they would definitely retreat. There was no need to fight to the death with them. Although there were 13 Yuanying elders in the Zhenluo Union, they came from different backgrounds and joined the union at different times. Generally speaking, as long as it didn't involve their own family, they would just pretend and not put in much effort. However, this elder Yao and Che-yi were not only from the same hometown, but they had entered the mountain together when they were young to seek Tao. Their friendship of nearly 1,000 years was extraordinary. How could he sit back and ignore this person's letter? After thinking about it, he decided to go back. Che-yi thought, even if Daoran leaves, it should be enough with Brother Huang and Brother Shang guarding this place. After making his decision, he ordered the Taoist boy to invite Huang Zhuguang and Shang Ting over. Not long after, the 2 of them came to the hall. Che-yi didn't beat around the bush and told them about his plan to help. Huang Zhuguang had no objections. Unexpectedly, Shang Ting, who had always been conservative, didn't object to this matter either. Che-yi unconsciously relaxed a little and cupped his hands. After Daoran, I'll have to trouble the 2 of you to take care of the Twin Moon Peak. Huang Zhuguang said heroically, Elder Che, take care. With the 2 of us here, we will definitely be safe. Shang Ting suddenly asked, when will Brother Che return? Che-yi stroked his beard and said, That depends on when the Lai Xian sect retreats. Shang Teng nodded and cupped his hands. Before Elder returns, we will not let anything happen to the Twin Moon Peak. Che Yi said with relief. After Daoren leaves, there will be one less person guarding the Twin Moon Peak. However, since that fellow Zhang borrowed our Earth-Fire Heavenly Cauldron, we might as well ask him to help if we encounter any difficulties. I don't think he will refuse. The two of them nodded. After giving his instructions, Che Yi adjusted himself slightly before standing up and flying out of the palace on a gust of strong wind. After he left, Shang Teng and Huang Zhuguang bowed and returned to their cultivation residence expressionlessly. Then, they took out a letter that they had prepared long ago from their sleeves and threw it into the air. It disappeared in an instant. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 457. The incense array covers the stars, and the net is changed by the wind. Liang Changgong had been looking for the azure wood for the past few days, and someone had given him 2 of them. However, this was only a drop in the bucket, and he still had to accept the favor. Just as he was worrying about this, Hua Xiaofang came to visit and brought the 24 azure wood to his mansion. She explained the whole story and said, "I didn't do well in this matter, and I'm ashamed." Fortunately, Master Zhang didn't argue with Daoren. As a token of my apology, I'll put the cost of refining the treasure on Daoren. However, I hope that the 2 of you can allow Daoren to observe from the side when you're refining the treasure. Liang Changgong didn't think that Hua Xiaofang had this purpose, and he couldn't help but hesitate. After all, the other party was an expert in this field. Although she wouldn't be able to learn the secret, she would be able to see a lot of things. He said awkwardly, "I can't make this decision alone, and I need to discuss it with fellow Wei." Hua Xiaofang could also guess what Liang Changgong was thinking, so she said seriously, "Fellow Liang doesn't need to worry, I definitely don't have any ulterior motives. If allowed, I'm willing to make a vow that I won't reveal what I've seen or heard. What do you think?" Liang Changgong was a bit surprised, but this was easy to say. He pondered for a long time, then nodded and ordered a servant to invite Wei Shudan over. The north and south moon peaks were close, and Wei Shudan arrived in a moment. When he entered the mansion, he was surprised to see Hua Xiaofang here. After listening to Liang Changgong's explanation, he finally understood. He thought for a moment and finally said, "In my opinion, I can agree to this. I can agree to this, but there is one thing I hope fellow Taoist Hua can agree to." Hua Xiaofang's face lit up and she said, "Please say it." Wei Shudan first looked at Liang Changgong, then cupped his hands at Hua Xiaofang, and said in a deep voice, "Your Honorable Sir's treasure record of weapon refining needs to be added with our names." Liang Changgong was startled, then his body trembled, and his heart palpitated. He had no hope of reaching the Great Tao, but he had some achievements in the path of forging weapons. But once he passed away, everything would disappear like the wind and clouds. However, if one wrote a book and left it in the world, it would leave one's name in history. It could also benefit countless descendants. Even if one reincarnated and cultivated again, their chances of entering the Tao again would be much better than ordinary people. Wei Shudan's calculations were extremely good. Even if the secret technique of the 2 of them was learned by him, with this book left behind, he would not be able to escape. In fact, the benefits were even greater. Hua Xiaofang frowned, a little hesitant. For this precious record, he had labored for more than 100 years. These 2 only needed to open their mouths. He didn't even need to spend any effort, yet he was about to bask in the limelight. This really made him feel a little unwilling. However, he had a favor to ask for, so how could he not pay a price? He could take the verdant azure wood back, but that would be the end of both sides. Zhang Yan might not be as easy to talk to as last time. Thinking about his lifelong wish, he sighed and cast aside his selfishness. He said in a deep voice, "Fine. I promise the 2 of you that I will write down your names on the place where the author wrote the book." Wei Shudan and Liang Changgong exchanged glances with one another. Both of them smiled. They finally let go of this matter and didn't need to toss and turn in bed like before, unable to sleep. After sending Hua Xiaofang away, Wei Shudan suddenly sighed. Brother Liang, this time Zhang Jinren didn't expose the two of us for lying to him, he really took care of our face. Liang Changgong retracted his smile and kept silent for a moment. He said, I am not someone who doesn't know what is good for me, so I can only take out my entire life skills to repay him. Wei Shudan nodded his head silently. After the two of them returned to the manor, they rejected all matters and then went to the side of the giant pit to build a hut and wait for the furnace to be opened. After Hua Xiaofang heard about it, he also came over to find a chance to discuss the path of artifact crafting with the two of them. The three of them could be called masters of this path, it was just that the path they inherited was different. As they talked, they each had their own understanding. Just like that, 5 months passed peacefully. When it was the beginning of autumn, the wind was chilly, the grass and trees were green, and the river was crossing the cold boat. It was already the day to open the furnace again. At 7 in the morning, Zhang Yan's robe fluttered as he rode the wind from the Dao Palace. He landed in front of the heavenly furnace and met up with the three of them again. After exchanging greetings, Liang Changgong spoke first. Zhang Jinren, this time the artifact crafting needs to be done in one go. According to my and Brother Wei's calculations, it should take 4 years. However, the flow of the earth qi outside cannot be made, otherwise, the meridians of the earth qi will be muddled and all the previous efforts will be wasted. I will have to trouble Jinren for this. The flow of earth qi in the giant pit was divided into clear and turbid. If one used a secret technique to guide and refine it, there would be miraculous effects. However, as time passed, it was inevitable that the qi would dissipate and the clear and turbid would flow together, mixing into a mess. At this time, someone would need to go forward and reorganize the chaos. The higher the cultivation of the person doing this, the easier it would be. Zhang Yan was the owner of the artifact in the furnace, and he himself was a Yuanying cultivator. For him to do this, there was no one more suitable than him. He also knew the crux of the matter, so he said with a smile, "This is I's matter, how can it be troublesome?" Wei Shun cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Zhang, there is one more thing. This time the artifact crafting will cause a huge commotion. In order to prevent thieves from causing trouble, I have already borrowed hundreds of strong men from the League to set up guard formations on all the mountains within a radius of 300 miles. If an enemy really comes, we will be able to detect it in advance." Even though it was necessary to take precautions before the artifact crafting, the Twin Moon Peak was the base of the Zhenluo League, and it was covered with restrictive formations. In his heart, he did not think that there would really be a great enemy attacking. He just wanted to use this to show how important this matter was to him. Zhang Yan nodded. This artifact was originally crafted for him, so of course, he would not allow others to come and cause trouble. He said, "As for the matters outside, there is naturally I to take care of it. You two don't have to worry, just focus on crafting the artifact." Liang Changgong bowed and said, "Jinren Zhang, we will enter the formation now." Wei Shudan and Hua Xiaofang also bowed with a Dao salute. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and returned the greeting. He said, "Then I will wait here for the good news." The three of them bowed again, then opened the restrictive formation and stepped into the pit. Then, they closed the restrictive formation, and mist rose up. From this moment on, other than the earth energy that could enter and exit without obstruction, no one else could enter the inner area. Zhang Yan took a few steps back and sat in front of the heavenly furnace. He took out a handful of earth fiend essence sand from his sleeve. This was obtained from the Feiyu Taoist palace. Even though he had to guard the earth qi and could not go above the extreme heaven, with this item, it would not hinder his cultivation. However, just as he was about to cultivate, he felt a chill all over his body. Suddenly, a strange feeling surged. This feeling came without warning, and it came and went in a flash. He frowned and stopped what he was doing. As his cultivation improved, he could faintly sense his own well-being. What happened just now was not a good sign, so he immediately became alert. He thought for a long time and thought to himself, could it be that someone is coveting this treasure? After thinking for a while, he smiled. Different situations call for different actions. At his current cultivation level, as long as it was not the Zhenren of the heavenly abode, he would be able to avoid it. Moreover, the matter had not yet arrived, so why bother thinking about it? In an instant he got rid of the distracting thoughts, closed his eyes, and focused. He sat there and cultivated. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly, a soft and clear voice rang in his ears. "Fellow Taoist, are you a cultivator from the Donghua continent?" Zhang Yan opened his eyes in surprise. He looked up and saw a delicate Taoist nun standing in front of him. Her eyebrows and eyes were picturesque, and she had an oval face. Her shoulders were sharp, and her figure was a little thin. Her sleeves were empty, as if they would be blown away by the wind. However, her aura was vast and surging, and it was hard to tell her cultivation level. Zhang Yan stood up slowly and replied, "I am Qinsong Zhang Yan. How should I address you, Taoist?" The Taoist nun smiled at him and said, "My surname is Cheng." She slowly turned her face and looked at the earthly fire heavenly cauldron. Her eyes were filled with melancholy. This place was created by I in the past. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of years have passed, and everything has changed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Taoist Cheng, you seem to have something on your mind?" The Taoist nun looked at him unhappily and said, "I am not a celestial, how can I not have troubles? Don't tell me those whose cultivation levels are much higher than mine have fewer troubles?" At this point, she could not help but let out a soft sigh and said, "I am just about to leave, so I specially came here to take a look at the things that are about to leave." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly and he said, "I still need to refine treasures here. Even if I leave this place, I will have to wait until I finish refining the treasures." The Taoist nun's bright eyes looked over and she couldn't help but laugh. "You are very straightforward and honest, and also a bit overbearing. To tell you the truth, I originally wanted you to protect this place and keep it safe, but now it seems that I can't restrain you. Forget it, everything has life and death, there is a beginning and an end, and there will be a day when the flowers fall and wither." She seemed to have thought of something and stretched out a jade arm from her sleeve. She opened her white palm and took out an item. She said, "I have to leave now. That person is really powerful. Even if he doesn't die, he probably doesn't have many years left to live. This item is useless to me, so I will give it to you, Taoist friend. When you finish refining the treasures, it might be of some use." Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and took it. Before he could take a closer look, he saw the Taoist nun smiling at him. Then, her figure suddenly disappeared and scattered. Countless petals and flying leaves rolled up together and went to the clouds, forming a magnificent sea of flowers that was dozens of miles long. It was luxurious and colorful. At this time, he heard a song coming from the clouds. "The sorrow of flowers, the beauty of time is fading. Who will listen to the grievances and pity? The incense array covers the stars, and the wind changes the sky." The peerless Dharma idol made a turn in the air and flew towards the zenith heaven. The sound of a zither broke through the sky in an instant, and countless purple and red flowers filled the void. It was not until an hour later that the Dharma idol completely disappeared. But he was not the only one who saw this strange phenomenon. In the Feiyu Taoist palace, Shang Ting stood up and rushed out of the cultivation residence. Huang Zuoguang came out with him, but the latter's eyes were full of confusion and surprise. He cried out involuntarily, "Zhenrencheng? Where is she going?" Unlike him, Shang Ting's eyes were filled with shock and a trace of irrepressible joy. He suppressed his new emotions and said in a guessing tone, "The thoughts of people in Mount Dong'an are not known by you and me. Maybe Zhenrencheng wants to travel far away." Chapter 194 Struggle for the Great Tao Free Full Text Chapter 194 The incense array covers the stars, and the wind changes the sky. The wind changes the sky. Chapter 458 Since Zhenrencheng has left, the great event can be expected. As he held the letter in his hand, Even someone as solemn as him could not help but reveal a smile on his face. With the departure of this Taoist master paradise, the biggest obstacle in front of Lai Xian's sect had disappeared without a trace. Although they had paid a great price to invite that person, compared to the divine beast egg, it was nothing. After a while, he slowly calmed down. He put down the letter and said to the blue-robed Taoist sitting to his right, "Nephew Ru, how is the arrangement going?" Taoist Rui said, "Martial nephew has already prepared the ancestral master's divine statue and is only waiting to go to Pingxi to bury it. But this time, we have used up all the resources that our cult has accumulated for hundreds of years. Now the warehouse is empty, enough for horses to gallop. There is nothing left." Obviously, Gong Yangsheng didn't care about this at all. He said, "It doesn't matter. These things are there to be used. As long as we succeed, we can buy them back. Martial nephew, you don't have to feel bad." Taoist Rui agreed. He paused and tried to mention something. "Recently, Qingshi Temple and Jinling's sect have been paying attention to our sect's movements. Martial nephew doesn't know how to make arrangements to hide from their eyes and ears." Gong Yangsheng sighed inwardly. This martial nephew's ability to handle matters was very mediocre. It seemed like he still had to ask him about such a small matter. Fortunately, this person was obedient enough. Disciples like Yi Jiliu, although their cultivation was not weak, were arrogant and unruly just because of their abilities. They were difficult to control. He already had a plan in mind regarding this matter. Thereupon he said, "This matter is easy to hear, you go spread the news. Let's say that 4 years from now, on the 6th day of the 8th month, it will be my patriarch's 500-year ascension ceremony that we should gather the cult's people to celebrate. Shiji, what do you think of this excuse?" Taoist Rui was startled and said in admiration, "Martial uncle's plan is brilliant." The Lai Xian sect had only been established for less than 500 years. Whether Venerable Iya had ascended or not, those who had lived longer in the middle pillar state were all very clear in their hearts. However, they could not stop the Lai Xian sect from flattering themselves. If he used this as an excuse to gather all the elders together, he would not be able to do so. It could indeed reduce the suspicions of Qingshi Temple and Golden Towering sect to the greatest extent, and it could also lower the guard of Zhenluo Alliance. Taoist Rui was full of praise for this policy, but Ram Sheng shook his head slightly. He picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip before asking, "How is that Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Yan was the key to the success or failure of this trip, so how could Taoist Rui not pay attention to him? Over at Shuang Fenyue's place, there had always been spies keeping an eye on him. He didn't even think before replying. It was said in the recent letters. "In front of the heavenly cauldron of earth fire, I'm afraid he won't be able to leave without several years." Gong Yangsheng's hand suddenly paused and said, "I heard that the higher the grade of the treasure, the longer it takes to refine it?" Priest Rui answered honestly, "Martial nephew doesn't understand this, but I've asked many experts before." "I think so." Gong Yangsheng slowly put down the teacup and said solemnly, "Then, junior nephew, do you think that if Priest Zhang fails, will he leave early?" Taoist Rui was stunned. He had never thought of this. But on second thought, this was indeed a problem. If Zhang Yan failed to refine the treasure, he would definitely fling his sleeves and return to the Donghua continent. But if that was the case, wouldn't all their arrangements be for naught? He hesitated. "Liang and Wei are both master blacksmiths. I don't think they will fail, right?" Gong Yangsheng gazed into the distance, and only after a long while did he say, "There's always a chance. Send a letter to tell Shang Ting that he must be safe before our sect takes action." Taoist Rui didn't dare to disobey and said, "Martial nephew understands." Gong Yangsheng pondered for a moment. He continued, "Also, tell him to quickly obtain the method to open the Twin Peaks moon restriction. If it really doesn't work, he has to find a way to deal with Huang's Wiguang before we go there." One did not know how long one had been cultivating. On the twin moon peak, winter passed and spring came. For years had passed unknowingly. One day, in the Taoist palace of Feiyu, Huang's Wiguang was refining a treasure when he suddenly heard a Taoist child reporting that Shang Ting had invited him to discuss some matters. He couldn't help but feel surprised. He and Shang Ting had never been on good terms. In the past, Che Yi would mediate between them, so they were still at peace. However, once Che Yi left, even if they bumped into each other, they would only greet each other. Why would he invite him today? Huang Zhuguang pondered. Was there something important in the alliance that Shang Ting suddenly invited him? With that thought, he didn't dare to delay any longer and immediately set off. According to the letter, he met Shang Ting at a pavilion in the back mountain of the Taoist palace. The place was surrounded by mountains and rivers, and there was a waterfall hanging from the cliff. The fragrance of flowers filled the air, and the scenery was beautiful. The guard of the Twin Moon Peak changed every 30 years. Huang Zhuguang usually only cared about cultivating and rarely went out, so he didn't know when such a beautiful scenery had been created in the back mountain. After sitting in the pavilion for a while, he suddenly saw a light fall not far away. After the light faded, Shang Ting appeared. He walked into the pavilion and bowed to Huang Zhuguang. "Brother Huang, I had something to deal with just now, so I came late. Please forgive me." Shang Ting usually spoke coldly to Huang Zhuguang, so the latter was suddenly not used to his politeness. After a slight pause, he said, "Brother, I wonder why you asked me to come here?" Shang Ting looked down the mountain. This place was specially chosen by him. It was remote and quiet. When the two of them talked, no one dared to come close. However, he still seemed worried and said in a deep voice, "Brother, please wait a moment." He waved his hand and a gray smoke spread out. In a moment, it covered everything within 100 feet. Not only was the wind and rain unable to pass through, but even the sun, moon, and stars could not enter. An imperceptible smile appeared on Shang Zhen's face. In this way, no one would be able to detect anything that happened here. Although Huang Zhuguang was suspicious, he did not speak when he saw Shang Zhen being so cautious. Only when Shang Zhen sat down did he ask anxiously, "Brother, what happened?" Shang Ting reached into his sleeve and took out a letter, saying, "Brother, please take a look." Huang Zhuguang did not know what was going on. He quickly took the letter and flipped through it. He was shocked by the content and cried out, "What? Lai Xian sect is actually planning such a scheme?" Because the news of the Lai Xian sect's ceremony had spread to the entire world, everyone knew that on that day, the elders of the sect would probably have to return to the main altar. As the day approached, the pressure on the Zhenluo alliance was greatly reduced and they relaxed a lot. However, this letter said that Lai Xian sect was planning to deceive everyone and was preparing to launch a surprise attack on the Twin Moon Peak. Huang Zhuguang never thought that there was an inside story. He found it hard to believe, and the more he read, the more shocked he became. After he finished reading, he put down the letter in his hand and said, "Brother, where did you get this news from?" Shang Ting shook his head and pointed at his hand, saying, "Just now I got this news, so I did not dare to make a decision. I immediately invited you over. There is an inside story written on the back of this letter. Brother, you will understand if you continue reading." Huang Zhuguang was startled. He hurriedly flipped the letter over and saw a portrait drawn on it. A Taoist was sitting cross-legged. There was a treasure light behind him, and he had a peaceful expression. He looked like an immortal. He had fought with Lai Xian sect for many years, so he immediately recognized that it was the portrait of his sect's ancestor, Iya. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the portrait suddenly seemed to come to life. Its eyes opened and a golden light shot out. Huang Zhuguang was caught off guard. He screamed and fell back while covering his eyes. Even though his eyes were in extreme pain, his mind wasn't in chaos, and he immediately realized that something was wrong. He practically instinctively activated his protective treasure light, and then with a command in his mind, a strand of light rose up before a thick and heavy bronze bell that was over a meter in size appeared before him. At this moment, a bolt of lightning struck down and hit the copper bell. With a rumble, the copper bell only trembled and was not damaged at all. Shang Zhen sighed in pity. He did not expect Huang Zhuguang to react so quickly. Fortunately, he had prepared a backup plan. Especially since Huang Zhuguang's eyes were injured, he had lost more than half of his combat power. No matter how he struggled, he could not escape. He made a gesture and set up a formation. The soil under his feet moved and a red net flew out and covered the copper bell. It struggled back and forth, but the net was extremely tough. It held it tightly and could not escape at all. At the same time, Shang Ting let out a shout and raised a colorful wooden box into the air. Clang, clang, clang. 3 sounds that sounded like gold and iron colliding were heard as 3 small green arrows flew out from the box. They seemed to be condensed from smoke and had shape but no substance. They were divided into the top, middle, and bottom and shot straight at Huang Zhuguang. Huang Zhuguang was at a disadvantage because his eyes were injured and he could not distinguish things. He did not know where Shang Teng's attack came from. He could only use the treasure light to defend himself. Who would have thought that this smoke arrow had an ulterior motive? The protective treasure light was unable to obstruct it in the slightest. It pierced right through his forehead, chest, and lower abdomen. He let out a muffled groan and fell to the ground. Shang Jin took a few steps forward and shook out a rope made of black gas from his sleeve. It fell and tied Huang Zhuguang tightly. Huang Zhuguang felt his body go numb. He was furious and was about to curse. But just as he was about to hit Zhang Yan, the rope tightened and the essence in his body dissipated. His eyelids drooped and he felt drowsy. He wanted to struggle, but he could not exert any strength. After a while, he completely lost consciousness. The copper bell lost its control and its light faded. With a clang, it fell to the ground. Shang Jin took a few deep breaths. Although he had made a lot of preparations, if Huang Zhuguang did not think about defending after blocking that attack and instead risked his life to charge out, he would not have been able to capture this person so easily. It could be said that he was somewhat lucky. After capturing this person, he was the only one in charge here. From now on, the door of Double Moon Peak was completely open to Lai Xian's sect. Shang Teng smiled proudly. As long as he took down Zhang Yan and took back the divine beast egg, he would be at the top of the list of rewards. He took a few steps and leisurely sat back in the pavilion. He took out a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. He then picked up the brush and wrote a letter. There were extraordinary words of self-praise in it. After reading it a few times, he felt satisfied and quickly put it into the letter. He looked up and chanted a few incantations. He raised his hand and grabbed, retracting the mist. Looking at the clear sky, he snorted and threw the letter into the sky. He was only relieved when it flew away and disappeared. Chapter 459. The Struggle for the Great Tao. Chapter 196. The Struggle for the Great Tao. The Golden Bridge leads 10,000 mountains on the 6th day of the 8th month. The grand ceremony of the Xian sect's patriarch, the 7 Yuanying Zenrins of the sect, returned to the main altar. However, regardless of whether it was the disciples or the guests, they did not know that among the 7 of them, other than Grand Elder Gong Yangda, who was still presiding over the ceremony, the rest of them only showed themselves briefly during the ceremony. After that, they hid in the inner hall and did not appear again. The ones who were left on the stage were only a few substitutes. These substitutes were not found in a hurry, but they had been preparing for a few years. There were hundreds of thousands of disciples in the Xian sect, so it was not difficult to find a few people who looked similar, but the difficulty was that their cultivation and aura could not be faked, so they used many methods to conceal it. Until now, they could finally pass off the fake as genuine and pass off fish eyes as pearls. But even so, it was easy to reveal flaws when they met those with sharp eyesight. Especially the great elder Gong Yangxing, there were too many people who were familiar with him. In addition, he had to preside over the ceremony and could not leave. In front of the cultivators from various sects who came to watch the ceremony, it was impossible to find substitutes from the beginning to the end, so he had to first put on a good show before he could find an opportunity to withdraw. In the inner hall, 6 Yuanying elders were sitting around. Priest Rui looked around and sighed. Fortunately, the Qingshi Temple and the Jinling sect did not send envoys to watch the ceremony, otherwise we and the other substitutes would not be able to hide. The female Taoist surnamed Tan widened her eyes and suddenly asked, "What method did senior brother Rui use to make them not come to watch the ceremony?" It would be unreasonable if they did not invite their fellow Taoists for the grand ceremony of the Xian sect, and at the same time, it would arouse suspicion. But if they invited someone over, it would be inevitable that they would give themselves away. Now, none of the disciples of the Qingshi Temple and the Jinling sect had come. There must be a reason behind it, and she was very curious about how Priest Rui did it. Priest Rui laughed and said, "Junior Sister Tan, it's actually not difficult. As long as the guest is willing to worship the golden statue of our sect's patriarch, he can be allowed to enter the inner altar. Otherwise, we can only ask him to stand in the outer hall to watch the ceremony." The female Taoist surnamed Tan suddenly understood and pursed her lips into a smile. No wonder. The Golden Soaring sect and the Qingshi Temple were, after all, two of the three sects in Pingdong. How would they be willing to pay respects to the patriarch of the Lai Xian sect when they were in the Middle Pillar continent? However, they weren't willing to stand together with the scattered sects and small clans outside the hall. Thus, they simply ignored it and pretended that they hadn't heard about it. The Lai Xian sect had always been spreading their teachings everywhere. Wherever the disciples went, they had to persuade others to worship their ancestors. Now that it was the ancestral master's ascension sacrificial ceremony, it was not surprising that the sect had such a request. The cultivators of the two sects also did not think that they actually had other intentions. While they were chatting excitedly, Yi Jiliu was getting impatient from waiting. "Martial uncle, how long do you want us to wait? It was just a few disciples from a small sect. What need was there for them to continue pretending? If he doesn't make a move, then so be it. Let's set off together. Can't he take down Daoist Zhang?" He shook his sleeves, stood up and walked out. As he walked, he said, "I'll go talk to Martial uncle. There's no need to wait any longer." Daoist Rui saw that the situation wasn't good, so he hurriedly grabbed his sleeves. He tried to persuade him, "Senior brother Yi, Martial uncle has his own arrangements. Senior brother, please don't be reckless." Yi Jiliu's eyebrows twitched. He shook off his hand and slowly turned around, saying coldly, "What do you mean by reckless? Junior brother, tell me properly." Daoist Rui saw the coldness in his eyes and immediately realized that he had said the wrong thing in a moment of desperation. This senior brother of his was violent, easily angered, and belligerent. If he didn't handle it well, something big would happen. However, he wasn't good at adapting to situations, so his forehead was instantly covered in sweat. Daoist Sha, who was sitting there, shouted in a deep voice, "Yi Jiliu, I'll let you be if you're so impulsive normally, but what day is it today? It can be said that the rise and fall of the Lai Xian sect depends on today. How can we allow you to act recklessly here?" However, not only did his words fail to intimidate Yi Jiliu, they had the opposite effect. Veins popped up on the sides of Yi Jiliu's eyes as he burst with anger. He had never been on good terms with Daoist Sha. It would have been better if Daoist Sha hadn't spoken, but the moment he did, he was immediately infuriated. He roared, "Shaliang, who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like that? Are you here to see if the magic sword at my waist is sharp enough?" In the past, Daoist Sha would either smile and avoid Yi Jiliu's provocations or simply ignore him. However, for some reason today, he acted out of character and retorted without backing down, "How dare you? In terms of seniority, I'm your martial uncle. How dare you threaten me? You disrespectful disciple, if you dare to fight me, do you think I won't be able to kill you in the ancestral hall?" When the other four saw that an internal strife might occur if they did not stop him, they immediately came forward to persuade him. Yi Jiliu's eyes flickered wildly. Those who were familiar with him would know that this was a sign that the rage in his heart was about to accumulate to the limit. However, at this moment, a flying talisman was sent over. Daoist Rui reached out to catch it. After taking a glance at it, he suddenly heaved a sigh of relief and turned to pass it to Yi Jiliu. "Senior brother, please take a look." Yi Jiliu frowned and received it suspiciously. He could not help but be stunned after taking a glance at it. Why is she here? According to the talisman, a Taoist companion of Yi Jiliu had come to look for him in the past. This woman belonged to no sect and came from a small clan. She left him after he became a nascent soul, and they had not seen each other for 200 years. However, her sudden appearance today inevitably made him puzzled. Taoist Ray said meaningfully, "Martial Uncle has said in advance that it's impossible for those two sects to let go of their suspicions with such great fanfare. Although their disciples won't come, they can invite others to come and investigate our sect's movements. This woman was most likely invited by them to specifically come here to test Senior Martial Brother. If Senior Martial Brother avoids meeting her or uses a substitute to deal with her, then we'll be exposed." Yi Jiliu's expression flickered. He snorted and said, "What's there to be afraid of? I'll go and meet her right now." He glared at Taoist Sand and stepped out. Taoist Ray was still worried, so he hurriedly cupped his hands at the other spiritual masters in the hall before turning to follow. No one noticed the flash of regret in Taoist Sand's eyes. He thought to himself, "What a pity. Just now, it would be great if we could injure this boorish fellow here." He used himself to measure others. He thought that with 7 or 8 spiritual masters working together, they would be able to suppress Zhang Yan no matter what. One more or one less person would not actually matter, as it would not affect the overall situation. Moreover, he knew Yi Jilia's temperament very well. This person was not good at accomplishing anything but was good at spoiling things. If he was allowed to act recklessly, it would be hard to avoid ruining the big picture. Thus, he attacked him with words to provoke his anger so that he would have an excuse to injure him. Given this person's temperament, he would most likely not go with them after suffering such a setback. However, he did not expect that a flying talisman would unexpectedly disrupt his plans. Fate was making fools of people, and he was powerless. The remaining 4 people waited for another hour. Suddenly, the candles in front of the hall flickered and the jade curtain was lifted. Elder Gong Yangsheng stepped in from outside, with Yi Jiliu and Taoist Ray on the left and right behind him. The elders in the hall knew that the time had come. They tried their best to suppress the agitation in their hearts as they stood up solemnly and bowed. Gong Yangsheng returned the greeting. He looked around and said loudly, "Fellow brethren, 500 years ago, our sect was born in response to the situation and rose to prominence in Pingdong. However, there was a flaw in this. The 3 sects in Central Continent stood side by side, and our sect only had a corner. Our hands and feet were unable to relax. But 500 years later, a divine object fell from the sky. If our sect could obtain this treasure, we would be able to secure our fate for thousands of years. When that day comes, it would not be wishful thinking to live in Central Continent." Having said that, Gong Yangsheng flicked his sleeves and went to the statue of the patriarch, kneeling on the praying mat. The 6 elders also hurriedly knelt down and paid their respects. Gong Yangsheng kowtowed thrice before standing up and offering the immortal incense. He prayed in his heart, "Patriarch, please bless this disciple's journey to be smooth. I will take back the treasure in one fell swoop and ensure that our sect's fate will be long and never decline." After paying his respects, he picked up the horsetail whisk and placed it on his arm. He turned around and said, "Fellow brethren, follow me." He flicked the horsetail whisk and activated the Dharma. In a split second, a 10,000 feet golden light rose from the underground path and rushed to the sky. The elders in the hall were in a trance. Their bodies felt light and they all leaped up with the light, flying into the clouds. Coincidentally, it was the time of the worship hall's grand ceremony of the Golden Day. The spectators only thought that Lai Xian's sect deliberately made such a big scene. In addition, they covered it up well, so no one suspected anything. In the blink of an eye, the 7 of them had traveled tens of thousands of miles and arrived at the boundary of the branch altar that had been set up beforehand. They found the patriarch's statue that was enshrined here and performed the same method again. They leaped up the 10,000 miles golden bridge and flew all the way to Pingxi. Mount Luchishan. Zhang Yan suddenly felt something. He opened his eyes and slowly stood up. He stared into the heavenly cauldron of earth fire. The chi of earth there suddenly churned and flowed chaotically. The heat wave was oppressive as if he was in front of a boiling spring. Even if he was not proficient in this, he knew that the talisman was about to be born. He stood silently for a moment before raising his head and looking at the sky. Ever since perfected Tian Cheng left, he had never let his guard down. These 4 years passed peacefully. He thought to himself that if there were any unusual movements, it would definitely be on the day that the talisman was forged. He waited until midnight. Suddenly, there was a rumbling sound under the heavenly cauldron. It was as if 1,000 drums were beating. The sound was intense and spread far and wide. The birds within 100 miles were startled and flew up in flocks. In the Twin Moon Peak, there were many cultivators who noticed the commotion. They stood up and leaped onto the clouds. They gazed into the distance and speculated in private. They wondered what kind of miraculous abilities this talisman would have after being forged by 2 master craftsmen for 4 years. However, at this moment, there was a sudden sound of thunder that pierced through the clouds. It was as if a tree was being smashed into a city. Each sound was louder than the previous one. There were rays of light that pierced through the sky. Not to mention the common people, even the cultivators were shocked. They did not know what was happening and looked up at the sky. There were ripples in the void. Layers of ripples spread out. Everyone could hear the sound of rolling stones and avalanches. Just as they were feeling uneasy, they suddenly heard a cracking sound. It was as if a spirit mirror had broken or a silver bottle had cracked. 1,000-foot-long light cliff climbed up. In the flickering light and shadow, 7 people slowly walked out of the void. They were either dressed in colorful clothes, cloaks, brocade robes with big sleeves, or a crown and a wide belt. Each of them was holding a talisman, a flying sword, a lightning pillar, and a horsetail whisk. Their bodies were covered in golden stars and the clouds were bright. For a moment, they looked like immortals who had descended to the mortal world. The 7 great elders of Lai Xian sect had crossed thousands of mountains and rivers and arrived at the Twin Moon Peak. The Struggle for the Great Tao Chapter 196 The Struggle for the Great Tao The Golden Bridge leads 10,000 mountains update completed. As he thought about it, he couldn't help but sneer. Apart from the divine beast egg, what else was there that was worth them making such a big fuss over? His intentions could be said to be as clear as day. However, the other party's timing was very clever. At this moment, the magic treasure that he had refined was about to be born, so he couldn't escape. Moreover, these 7 people did not even hesitate for a moment before rushing towards him. Clearly, this attack was not a blind one. It must have been meticulously prepared. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. The warning signs in his heart were probably related to this matter. A bloody battle was probably unavoidable. In just a moment, the 7 of them arrived in front of the cauldron of earth fire. Seeing that Zhang Yan was standing steadily in front of them, they circled around him and all of them shouted out loud, channeling their spells. The Yuanying people all flew out of the cauldron. Under the night sky, the clouds shone brightly, and it was filled with light clouds and mist, covering this area of the world. Zhang Yan faced the 7 of them alone. Under the gazes that were filled with enmity, his expression was calm and composed, without any fear. Gong Yangsheng stood out from the crowd. This was the first elder. 3 astral clouds had already appeared above his head. It was obvious that he had already stepped into the 2nd layer of the nascent soul stage. His cultivation was a level higher than the other 6. He cupped his hands and said condescendingly, "Spiritual Master Zhang, the 7 of us came here just to get the divine beast. If you return it to us, we can let bygones be bygones. If you are unwilling, there is no need for Daoren to say what will happen to you." Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and smiled. "Fellow cultivators, I don't think you are here to argue. There is no need to say more, let's fight." Gong Yangsheng originally thought that if Zhang Yan was forced by their power and willingly handed over the divine beast, that would be the best. At that time, it would be up to him to advance or retreat. If he failed, it wouldn't be too late to make a move. However, seeing that Zhang Yan's tone was unyielding and there was no room for discussion, he immediately gave up trying to persuade him. He said indifferently, "Since fellow cultivator insists on doing this, then don't blame us for using our power to oppress you. Why are you still talking to him?" Yi Jiliu couldn't hold back anymore. Seeing that the 2 of them couldn't come to an agreement, he ignored the others and rushed out first without waiting for Gong Yangsheng's order. When he was halfway there, he slapped his waist and a "chong lang" sound was heard. A silver rainbow flew out of the sheath and turned in the air. Accompanied by the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger, it quickly came down to kill. This magical sword hadn't even come close, but the cold air emitted from the sword's edge had already shot out. Zhang Yan squinted at the flying magic sword. The blade was as white as snow, and there were countless silver threads on both sides of the sword, wriggling like branches. It was very strange and should have some unique features. Therefore, he didn't dare to be careless. With a long roar, a golden light bloomed above his head. In the dense mist, a yuanying figure with 5-colored brilliance behind it appeared. Yi Jiliu's magic sword was called the Dragon Centipede Sword. It contained several transformations, especially the sword refining method, which was borrowed from the secret technique of the Shaoqing sect. It was extremely powerful, and it had never lost a battle against its enemies. Back then, the Shaoqing sect had lost dozens of disciples in battle in the Middle Pillar continent. Some of them had secret manuals on their treasures, and many of them were taken by the cultivators of the Middle Pillar continent. Although they couldn't learn the orthodox methods, a group of intelligent people found a strange path and derived many powerful methods. Yi Jiliu was one of them. After obtaining this method, he spent more than 10 years to refine this magic sword. When the two were combined, its power was multiplied. Now, apart from the two elders who were a generation older than him, his battle prowess could be said to be the strongest here. Therefore he thought highly of himself. When he saw that Zhang Yan was only a cloud above his head and that his cultivation was a level lower than his own, his confidence was immediately boosted. Even though he knew that Zhang Yan's divine ability was powerful, he still dared to fight him alone. When the others saw that Yi Jiliu had already made his move, they wanted to follow him and kill him together, but they were stopped by Ram Xing. He looked down and said in a deep voice, "It's fine to let him try. If he can't win, we can go forward." Yi Jiliu had always been a prideful person. If he did not say anything, the crowd would probably fall out with him if they were to step forward to help him. Thus, he might as well let them do as they pleased. This could be considered as a test to gauge Zhang Yan's strength. As the sword light approached, Zhang Yan didn't dodge at all. A yellow glow fell from his back and spread out, forming a light barrier that was 30 feet tall and half a kilometer wide in front of him. This yellow glow was thick and solid. The Dragon Centipede sword only managed to advance a few inches before it found it difficult to move forward. Yi Jiliu snorted coldly and immediately used his divine ability. He pointed his finger, and the magical sword trembled slightly. Countless strands of silver hair fell off from the body of the sword, hissing as they searched for an opening and penetrated the yellow radiance in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yan was calm and composed. His body did not move as he waited for the silver whiskers to reach him. Then, a blue light appeared behind him and flashed past. Like a surging wave, the blue light engulfed the silver whiskers and swallowed them whole. Yi Jiliu was slightly startled by this and his expression turned grave. He let out a low roar and made a series of hand seals. The Dragon Centipede sword trembled incessantly as the silver whiskers on it grew and fell again. In just a few breaths' time, there were tens of thousands of them, blotting out the sky and the sun. With another wave of his hand, the tens of thousands of silver needles twisted into several strands and spread out in a formation, attacking from several directions. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back. The blue glow behind him flickered incessantly like a flood and rumbled. The silver needles continued to rush forward, but no matter how many there were, they were all like stones thrown into the sea, disappearing without a trace. The 6 spectators frowned as they watched. A few of them had experienced Yi Jiliu's magic sword before, so they knew how powerful it was. Even though he had yet to use his final trump card, it was not something that could be easily parried. However, Zhang Yan was handling it with such ease. It was obvious that he was still holding back. They had never seen such a technique before. Looking at his back, there was a total of 5 colored lights circulating. 2 of them had already stopped Yi Jiliu's attack, but there were still 3 more that he hadn't used. They wondered what other mysteries were hidden within. Of course, Zhang Yan wouldn't just defend without attacking. Taking advantage of a gap in Yi Jiliu's attack, He flicked his sleeve and several dozen drops of heavy water splashed out. Yi Jiliu saw that the drops of heavy water were only the size of water droplets. They were as black as ink, devoid of light and color, and looked unremarkable. Initially he had underestimated them, but when they collided with his protective light, a loud boom rang out. It was as if he had been struck by a heavy hammer, causing him to lose his footing and sway uncontrollably. Only now did he realize how powerful they were. He hurriedly took a few steps back and activated his transcendence energy. The protective light of Yuanying's protective light grew brighter, and he summoned his flying sword to protect himself. He flew back and forth, flashing repeatedly. After a flurry of movements, he managed to catch the several dozen drops of heavy water. Seeing this, Taoist Rui sighed. I've long advised Senior Marshal Brother Yi to refine a transcendent artifact to protect himself, but he just wouldn't listen. Regardless of whether it was attacking or defending, the Shaoqing sect always relied on a sword pellet. It was known as one sword master's life and death, solitary path carries yin and yang. Ever since Yi Jiliu learned this method, he felt that this saying was to his liking. Thus, he learned it to the fullest. He felt that a magic sword was enough for him to roam the world, so he didn't bother to refine some protective artifact. Seeing that Yi Jiliu had no time to deal with anything else, Zhang Yan wouldn't miss this opportunity. He pointed his finger, and the yellow light rose higher and higher like dust. When it reached the sky, it came crashing down with an earth-shattering rumble. Shock finally appeared in Yi Jiliu's eyes. In the face of such an attack, when one couldn't figure out the opponent's strength, the only thing one could do was turn around and dodge. However, there were fellow disciples watching from the side. If he had to retreat after just a few moves, how could he do such a shameful thing? With a shrill cry, he held the magic sword in a backhand grip and slashed a few times. The silver light was like a thunderbolt in the night sky, cutting open a few openings in this earth element true light. He then leaped up and was about to rush out from the front. However, he had only flown 1,000 feet away when he felt the yellow soil around him flying and dust and sand were everywhere. The further he went, the more sluggish his body became. At this moment he saw the turbid smoke and dust rolling. Looking around, he suddenly realized that he had barged into a palm that was 1,000 feet in size. His expression couldn't help but change. Just as he was about to retreat, he saw the 5 fingers suddenly move and close inwards. Chapter 461. When Yi Jiliu saw that the hand was closing in, he could only hurriedly open the protective light around his body and forcefully resist it. However, the 5 fingers continued to close in with great force, pressing down like layers of mountains. Seeing that the protective light was on the verge of shattering, Yi Jiliu's expression changed, and he immediately began to feel regret. He did not have any protective talisman and could only rely on his own strength to hold on. Just now, if he were to risk his life and slash with his sword, he might still be able to fight his way out. However, it was too late now, and he could not free his hands at all. If no one came to his rescue, he would be crushed into a pile of minced meat in no time. Seeing that he was at his wit's end, with a wave of his horsetail whisk, he no longer hesitated and shouted, "Save him!" The other 5 also saw that the situation was critical, and they all made their moves. However, their speed varied, and their targets were also different. As soon as he opened his mouth to speak, he produced a jade talisman from his sleeve that was emanating a faint aura. The talisman had dragon and tiger markings engraved on its front, and he tossed it out. It flew down from the cloud and slammed into the huge Xian Huang hand. The 4 martial nephews behind him also took out their talisman and attacked together with him. Taoist Sand, however, paid no attention to Yi Jiliu. Expressionlessly, he flicked his sleeve, and a golden white pellet the size of a goose egg shot out, which went straight for Zhang Yan. Just now, the jade talisman arrived. Zhang Yan raised his hand, and a gloomy yellow light rose up, blocking in front of him. As the two collided, a few cracks appeared on the jade talisman, and it was sent flying back. Meanwhile, the true earth light also cracked like a rock, exploding. The path ahead was unobstructed, and the 4 talismans behind just happened to rush in. They landed on the giant yellow hand one after another, and in an instant, they scattered it. They turned into thousands of wisps of yellow smoke that drifted in all directions. Yi Jiliu suddenly felt the pressure on him lessen, and he immediately saw an opportunity. He also wielded the dragon centipede sword and slashed with all his might, cleaving a path through the endless dust and sand. Using a flying technique, he escaped through the gap. Zhang Yan sneered and pointed with 2 fingers. With a clear cry, the stellar sword orb and the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle flew out together and chased after him. At this moment, Taoist Sha's golden white flying ball had also landed. Before it even got close to his body, the black robe on his body suddenly emitted a 3 bright light. It rushed up to meet the flying ball, but it only rolled on the ground and did not fall. Taoist San's expression froze as he said in a low voice, "Protective gown?" The star's sword pellet was so fast that Yi Jiliu could not escape in time. He hurriedly summoned the dragon centipede sword over to parry. With a clang, it blocked the sword pellet. However, the pentaspirit white carp shuttle circled around, and under a fierce peck from it, the protective treasure light actually shattered. Yi Jiliu was shocked. The technique he cultivated wasn't of the orthodox profound school, so if the treasure light protecting his body was broken, he would need to refine it again. Then, when facing the pentaspirit white carp shuttle that was flying towards him, he would have no way to restrain it. Seeing this from the cloud, Ram Sheng frowned. He threw the horsetail whisk in his hand, and the 1,000 threads scattered down like a net, actually wrapping around the pentaspirit white carp shuttle. However, this profound artifact seemed to be unwilling to admit defeat. It swung its head and tail, and the scales on its back glowed with a golden light. Unexpectedly, the net could not hold it in any longer, and the tenacious threads broke. In the blink of an eye, it rushed out. Now that Yi Jiliu had a chance to catch his breath, he didn't dare to be careless anymore. He chanted an incantation, pointed at the dragon centipede sword, and said, "Transform." The sword trembled. The front and the back were split into 2 sections. With another tremble, the sword body emitted a white light and turned into 2 identical magic swords. One flew up, still blocking the stellar sword ball, and the other flew back to his bosom like a tired bird returning to the forest. He reached out and grabbed the hilt. With a sword in hand, he regained some confidence. At this moment, the pentaspirit white carp shuttle was flying toward him again. Having seen how powerful this treasure was, he quickly flipped the magic sword upward, and with a clang, he barely managed to block it. However, this magic treasure was very intelligent, so he immediately circled around it, trying to find an opening. Everyone saw a golden light flying around him, chasing him relentlessly. Killing intent flickered in Zhang Yan's eyes. These 7 people came from the same sect, so if they attacked together, it wouldn't be easy to deal with them. It would be best if he could kill one of them first. Now that he had such a good opportunity, how could he miss it? Thus, he was not going to let Yi Jiliu off easily. With a command from his mind, the star's sword orb suddenly jumped and transformed into 16 dazzling sword rays. Each of them shot out like arrows, whistling through the air as they slashed toward Yi Jiliu. Anyone could see that Yi Jiliu was already in dire straits under the siege of the spirit shuttles. If these 16 flying swords were to slash at him, he would die without a doubt. Gong Yangsheng had no choice but to save him again. However, after exchanging 2 blows with Zhang Yan, 2 of his magic treasures had already been destroyed, so he wasn't willing to use any more ordinary items to make up the numbers. With a shake of his body, an ancient jade rui appeared from a cloud above his head. It floated in the dense mist, bobbing up and down. Once it was activated, a ray of clear light shone down, piercing straight into the formation of the heaven pit of earth fire, illuminating everything down to the slightest detail. When the 16 sword rays were illuminated by this ray of light, it was as if they had fallen into mud. They were immediately hindered and slowed down. At this moment, Taoist San shouted, "Shixiang, let's work together to kill Taoist Zhang." At first, he had the idea of besieging Wei to rescue Zhao, attacking the enemy where he had to rescue Yi Jiliu. However, after Zhang Yan sensed a warning in his heart, he was already prepared. That was why he wore the two treasured robes, the 7 stars sun binding robe and the Jing Luo Dun Jun Baoyu robe, to protect himself. Taoist sand alone couldn't take him down, but if there were several people working together, their chances would increase greatly. Reminded, Gong Yangxing turned his gaze over. He also made a prompt decision and said, "Martial nephew Ru, quickly go back and protect him. Fellow brethren, follow me to surround and kill Taoist Zhang." Having received the order, Taoist Rui wanted to rush down to save Yi Jiliu before the flying swords arrived. Just now, Zhang Yan had found an opportunity. How could he allow the other party to save him? He spread his sleeves and 365 serene in heavy drops flew out at the same time, scattering in all directions. Everyone had seen the power of this item earlier, so they couldn't care less about attacking the enemy. They had no choice but to stop and protect themselves. At the same time, Zhang Yan wanted to summon the star's sword pellet back with a thought. Who knew that the jade rui on top of Gong Yangxing's head was rather marvelous. The brilliance it gave off was like a cage. The star's sword pellet went back and forth a few times, but when it reached the edge, it couldn't rush out. Gong Yangxing waved his sleeves to block all the serene in heavy water. Coincidentally, he saw this scene and couldn't help smiling. 500 years ago, during the battle with Shaoqing in the Middle Pillar State, he was lucky to escape with his life. Since then, after witnessing the power of the flying swords, he had been thinking about how to defend against them. This jade rui was refined to trap flying swords. Even if the Shaoqing sect disciples personally came to kill him with their flying swords, he was confident that he could restrain them. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Ever since he stepped into the Yuaning realm, the sword kinesis technique he learned could no longer keep up with his current cultivation base. Thus, he didn't rely on it as his main method. Originally, he wanted to find a chance to kill Yi Jiliu with his sword, but now it seemed that it wouldn't work. However, he had many methods now. Even if he didn't use this method, he didn't believe that he couldn't take down this person. However, with this delay, the other elders of Lai Xian sect also blocked the serene in heavy water and regained their breaths. Gong Yangxing didn't hesitate either. He secretly made a hand seal and a black iron ruler flew out from the top of his head. When the others saw that he had already made his move, they followed suit and took out their own magic treasures and attacked Zhang Yan at the same time. A cold light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He waved his sleeves and scattered more than 50 scarlet thunder beads. The water element true light around him rose and flew up, lifting these magic treasures. Immediately, white foam splattered and thousands of jade waves were smashed. Among these magic treasures, because the iron ruler was the first to open a path and it was controlled by its owner with all his strength, it was difficult for the water element true light to sweep and retract it. However, with the continuous flow of the water and the back and forth of the waves, it slowed down the momentum of the magic treasures. When Gong Yangxing saw dozens of scarlet thunder beads flying towards him, he thought that it was still the serene in heavy water and was about to block it like just now. However, when it was right in front of him, his expression suddenly changed and he roared, "Dodge!" At first, the others were the same as him and didn't think much of it. When they heard his warning, they knew that this thing was definitely not simple. However, if they wanted to dodge now, it would be too late. They could only take out their protective magic treasures and brace themselves to withstand it. Waves of earth-shaking tremors came from the cloud, as if the sky was collapsing. Even with the protection of magic treasures, the 5 people, including Gong Yangxing, were still blasted to the point that their blood and qi were boiling. Their clothes were torn and they were in a sorry state. They only managed to stop after retreating for a few miles. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Yan pointed with his hand and gathered the 365 drops of serene in heavy water in one place again, which then rushed towards Yi Jiliu like a torrent. On the other side, Taoist Rui was close to Yi Jiliu and was about to join forces with him to deal with the 5-spirit white carp shuttle. However, when he heard the rumbling behind him, he turned around and was startled. He quickly took out a banner and shook it against the wind. It grew to a height of 50 feet and he placed it in front of him. Just the dozens of drops of serene in heavy water were enough to make them unable to defend themselves, not to mention that they were all here at the moment. In just a few breaths, the banner was smashed into pieces. He hastily abandoned it and took out another jade talisman, but it only lasted for a short while before it shattered. The remaining 20% of serene in heavy water smashed onto the protective treasure light, causing his body to shake violently and the light to disperse. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood and fell down. Zhang Yan took a step forward, and like a flickering light, he crossed the distance of 100 feet in a flash. When he reappeared, he was less than 30 feet away from Yi Jiliu. He raised his hand and pointed forward. A bolt of purple lightning seemed to sweep through the clear sky and burst forth with a loud bang. Yi Jiliu was also a courageous person. He knew that there was no way he could survive if he tried to dodge now, so he gritted his teeth and did not retreat. Instead, he gathered all his magic power in one place and brazenly raised the dragon centipede sword. A streak of silver light flashed like lightning and charged toward Zhang Yan, hoping to kill this formidable enemy first. However, as soon as the magic sword flew out, the 5-spirit white carp shuttle shot out from the side with a whistling sound and knocked it aside. At this moment, the purple heaven thunderbolt was already right in front of him. Yi Jiliu's protective treasure light had already been broken, and his magic sword had fallen out of his hand. In the face of this killing divine ability, he had no way to defend himself. He did not even have the time to let out a scream before his entire body exploded into dust with a loud bang. Daoist Ray was terrified at the sight of such a miserable state. Seeing that Zhang Yan had his back to him, he turned and ran without hesitation. He had not gone far when a fine golden light as thin as a gossamer caught up to him. It only flashed once on his body before it disappeared. He ran another 100 feet before his body suddenly stiffened. With a loud cry, his body was split into two at the waist and he fell from the sky. Chapter 462. Just now, the red lightning pearl had forced him several miles away and he couldn't help in time. Seeing how Zhang Yan killed 2 of them in an instant, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he stomped his feet and sighed, dispersing the spell that he had picked up. When the rest of the people from the Xian sect saw this scene, their eyes were filled with fear, but there was also a hint of bewilderment mixed in. They originally thought that no matter how strong this priest was, with the 7 of them working together, they would be able to defeat him. However, they didn't think that they would lose 2 of their nascent soul elders before they could even hurt him. One had to know that 2 elders from the Xian sect had died in the hands of Zhang Yan. If they continued to fight, how many more would die? Thinking about that, they felt really nervous. It was good to strengthen the sect, but it had to work. If they lost their own lives, then it wouldn't be worth it. To be able to reach the position of an elder in the sect, they had gone through hundreds of years of hard work. They hadn't enjoyed enough blessings, so how could they be in a rush to die? Even if they made great contributions to the sect and could enter the Tao in their next life, who could say that they would have such achievements today? How could Gong Yangxing not see the selfish and distracting thoughts in their hearts? Although his expression didn't change, he knew that it wasn't good. Although he was the great elder Zhang of the Lai Xian sect, the other elders were considered to be on the same level as him. Although they all had their own selfish motives, he could still use his status as an elder to suppress them. However, once it involved a matter of life and death, it would be wishful thinking to call everyone to risk their lives. If he couldn't come up with a solution, then there was no need to continue fighting. However, after fighting with Zhang Yan a few times, he could tell that apart from himself, if the other 4 were to fight Zhang Yan alone, it would be good if they could keep their lives. What he was more worried about was that just now, Zhang Yan's step covered 1,000 feet. With such a teleportation ability, he could escape from the battlefield at any time and head elsewhere. He originally thought that with the Jade Rui in hand, he would be able to restrict his sword escape technique. However, from the looks of it, he couldn't trap this person at all. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party's magic treasure had yet to be completely refined, he would have long since left. He did have an item that could restrain this person, but this treasure could not be used lightly, so he hesitated for a moment. Daoist Sand could see that he was in a difficult position, so he took the initiative to speak up, senior martial brother. Now that things have come to this, we can only ask for the ancestral master statue. The other 3 Lai Xian sect elders, the female priest surnamed Tan, Gao Shidi and the bald Taoist, looked at each other. The bald Taoist stood out and said, Sherboy is right. Hurry up and bring out the patriarch statue. The Lai Xian sect had 2 statues in the ancestral hall. One of them received daily incense and there was nothing special about it. As for the other one, it could condense magic power to temper the divine statue's body. In particular, there was a mental cultivation method in the sect. Every time the members of the sect prayed to the statue of the patriarch, they had to follow the ritual. It was equivalent to refining this item. After 400 to 500 years, the statue had received the worship of countless people, and now all 8 meridians were opened. The internal organs were already born, and the inside and outside were like a living person. If it was refined for another few hundred years, when this item developed true consciousness, it would merge with the remnant soul that Iya Venerable left behind. It would definitely be able to borrow the body to live and become a sect-protecting treasure. Its power would not be inferior to a Taoist master Dong Tian guarding the sect. At that time, if there was the help of a divine beast, the Lai Xian sect would become the #1 sect in Zhongzhou soon. Before they came to attack Zhangyan, they were afraid that the Zhenluo Union's formation was too strong to break, and they were also afraid that the elders would come back to help after hearing the news. Thus, they brought this treasure just in case. Thus, once the treasure was used, it would definitely consume a lot of vitality. In this way, the final refinement would probably be delayed for another 100 years. They were originally prepared to use it as a last resort, but they didn't expect Zhang Yan to be so difficult to deal with. Thus, they all had the intention to ask for the statue. Seeing that it was difficult to go against the will of the crowd, Gong Yangsheng pondered for a moment and said, "All right, please protect me." Hearing him agree, the 4 of them calmed down and answered. They stood at the 4 corners and protected him. There were 3 layers of restrictions on the statue, and each layer had a different use. However, they believed that even if they could only open 1 layer, it would be more than enough to take down Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed. He could tell that these people were going to use some kind of technique again. However, after circling around a few times, he realized that these people weren't standing randomly on the 4 corners. Instead, they were secretly in a formation, and their defense was tight without any loopholes. He casually sent a few bolts of purple cloud lightning in, and seeing that there was no movement, he knew that this formation was hard to break. He had a thought and decided to retreat. He sat on the cloud to see what they were planning. In less than 5 minutes, Gong Yangxing, who was standing in the middle of the 4 of them, suddenly shouted. He pushed his hands up and a light cloud floated up. In the cloud, a lifelike statue of Patriarch Iya, who was wearing a gold-threaded sun and moon robe, was brought out. The statue was about 100 feet tall. Once it appeared, celestial music was played and the sound of tens of thousands of worshippers was heard. It emitted thousands of soft and clear lights that shone in all directions. Even the entire Luchi was bathed in the auspicious light. The 5 of them who were standing under the statue felt like it was a good rain, and as the nectar entered their throats, they felt comfortable all over. Their mana surged and it was hard to control, as if it was going to burst out. Gong Yangxing also felt that his cultivation had increased by a lot. Instantly, he became more spirited and shouted, "Friends, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?" He leaped into the air and opened his hand. Lightning flashed in his palm and a bolt of lightning was shot towards Zhang Yan. Taoist Sha and the other 3 did the same. They shouted and raised their hands. They gathered their mana and turned it into a bolt of lightning. Zhang Yan sat on the cloud without moving. The 5-colored light behind him rippled like waves. A blue ray surged out like a broken dam and rushed up, creating a 1,000-feet wave that clashed with the bolt of lightning. In an instant, there was a series of explosions. Although this round of attack was blocked, Gong Yangxing and the other 4 didn't seem to have the intention to stop. They kept on channeling their mana and shot out bolts of lightning. The force of the water element true light was stopped. One after another, the waves were worn down. The attacks of the 5 of them were slowly closing in on Zhang Yan. Gong Yangsheng's face showed a deep smile. With the help of the statue, their mana was endless and they didn't have to worry about running out. No matter how strong this priest Zhang was, he was only a Yuanying first-level cultivator. How could he defend against their combined attack? Using force to defeat the enemy was the stupidest method. But in this situation, it was the most useful. The position he chose to attack from had a knack. At this moment, if Zhang Yan were to withdraw and dodge, it would not be impossible, but the astral lightning would definitely fall on the earth fire sinkhole below. Even if there was a restriction protecting this place, without anyone controlling it, it would not be able to last more than a few rounds. If the pit was destroyed, it would be difficult to refine the treasure. Then all the previous efforts would be in vain. Gong Yangsheng was sure that Zhang Yan wouldn't abandon the treasure. After Taoist Yi Jilia left, the 5 of them, be it attacking or defending, worked as one. They advanced and retreated in an orderly manner. As a cultivator of the second layer of the nascent soul realm, with 3 strong clouds above his head and the help of the other 4, if he were to face Zhang Yan head-on, he would definitely be able to suppress Zhang Yan. Sure enough, countless bolts of lightning descended like raindrops and exploded out successively, causing the water element true light to shatter into pieces and faintly showing signs of dispersing, and it seemed as if it would be unable to be maintained at any moment. But in such a dangerous situation, Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. He continued to sit upright and no change could be seen on his face. At this moment, someone shouted from afar, "Taoist Zhang, don't panic. I am here to help." Zhang Yan turned and saw a person in a Yuanying Dharma body flying over. He couldn't help but smile. "It's Taoist Shang. Thank you for your help. May I know where Taoist Huang is?" Shang Teng called out from afar. "Taoist Huang is in charge of the seal of the Tao Palace and can't be distracted. Taoist Zhang, don't panic. I have already sent out a letter asking for help. If the 2 of us work together, we just need to hold on for half a day before the elders outside return." Zhang Yan said happily, "If that's the case, Taoist Shang, quickly come and help me." Shang Teng was delighted and hurried over. He had been watching the battle in the Tao Palace. Just now, when he saw Zhang Yan landing below, he had a plan to take advantage of it. He thought that if he could sneak an attack on Zhang Yan, who else in the Xian sect could stand shoulder to shoulder with him other than Gong Yangsheng? However, he was used to being cautious. When he was about to reach Zhang Yan, he stopped. At this moment, Zhang Yan turned around and looked at him. He was slightly surprised and said, "Taoist Huang, why are you here too?" Shang Teng's heart shook. He knew that Huang Zhuguang was trapped by him, but he still couldn't help but look back. When he saw that there was nothing behind him, he knew that he had fallen into a trap. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve expressionlessly and a yellow light fell on his head. With a bang, it smashed on the protective treasure light and immediately scattered it. Shang Teng's chest tightened and he vomited blood as he retreated. In a moment of desperation, his vision blurred and he seemed to see a golden light attacking him. He hurriedly used a flying technique and leaped, wanting to escape into the distance. At this moment, he suddenly felt a chill on his neck and his head silently slid down. At this moment, he had already used his escape technique and his headless body suddenly rushed out for hundreds of feet before falling from the sky. What a pity! Gong Yangsheng sighed to himself. Regret was written all over his face. It would have been great if he had stepped forward to stop them. Shang Teng was originally a disciple of his master. He had always done his best to do things. If he could successfully obtain the divine beast egg this time, he would be able to take the position of an elder when he returned to the sect. However, he didn't want to die in such a useless way. Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. Did this person really think that he could deceive him? The Lai Xian sect was able to kill their way here without any obstruction. He would never believe that there was no one to help them. Seeing that this person came close, the 5 people from the Lai Xian sect had no intention of stopping him. Their expressions were subtle and he knew that there was something wrong with this person. Moreover, he felt that his relationship with Shang Ting wasn't that good. He actually took the risk of being besieged and came to help. This act was too much. At this moment, The thunder behind him was getting louder and louder. He looked back and saw that the lightning was approaching. The water element true light could no longer withstand it and was already on the verge of collapsing. Under such an impact, even the light on his treasure clothes trembled for a while. Seeing this, he no longer hesitated. He raised his hand and waved his sleeve. A flourishing green light suddenly climbed up. Chapter 463. After the green light appeared, Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and turned around to enter it. He focused on circulating his spiritual power, only to see that the green light continued to grow. It grew taller and taller, giving off an unstoppable aura. The 5 people from Lai Xian sect didn't know how mysterious this light was, but they were afraid of how strong Zhang Yan's technique was. They didn't dare to move forward and could only throw down the lightning in their hands to test its depth. Under the lead of Gong Yangxing, streaks of green lightning exploded in the air, ringing non-stop in the sky, bombarding the wood element true light. However, this light was very strange. Every time a clump was cut down, another clump would grow out. It was like the grass on the plains, there was no end to it and no end to it. The combined efforts of the 5 of them weren't able to stop it from rising. The 5 element true lights each had their own uses. In terms of defending against such continuous attacks, the wood element true light was the best. Moreover, this light was the hardest to control. Once it started, it would grow endlessly. If the spiritual power didn't stop, there would be no end to it. Just at this moment, Zhang Yan seemed to have sensed something and looked down. He sensed a strand of exuberant vitality was surging out from within the pit, and it was like a fledgling that was about to break out of its shell, yet was still a little bit away from being able to emerge into the world because of the final barrier. He couldn't help but feel energized. He didn't need to think much to know that the treasure was about to be refined. If that was the case, as long as he could hold on for a while and wait for the treasure to be born, then once he got his hands on it, he would be able to decide whether to fight or to make peace, to leave or to stay. A moment after Gong Yangxing and the others attacked, they realized that the pillar of green light didn't weaken at all. Instead, it became even stronger. At the start, the lightning could still make it tremble a little. However, at this moment, it didn't even cause a ripple and couldn't be shaken. Not long after, above the pit of earth fire, there seemed to be a pagoda with a green peak. It was tall and straight, supporting the heavens and the earth, reaching into the clouds. Just by looking at its appearance, he knew that all his efforts were in vain. They couldn't help but look at each other with unsightly expressions. They had paid such a huge price to invite the patriarch's divine statue this time. If they still couldn't do anything to this person, then they wouldn't have a foothold in the sect in the future. Once the news got out, the followers of the cult would certainly lose their morale, and the Qingshi Temple and the Golden Ling sect would certainly come to add insult to injury. At this moment, it was hard for them to back down. Taoist Sha's face darkened. "Senior Marshal Brother, if we don't kill this Taoist Zhang today, we won't be able to live peacefully. Why don't we remove the second seal?" It was a restrictive spell. It could increase the power of everyone, and if the second restriction was undone, it could activate a talisman that could gather the power of everyone in Lai Xian sect and activate the power of a magic treasure to the maximum. Gong Yangxing sighed. He nodded and said, "All right." With his permission, Taoist Sha's expression turned serious. He raised his palm and chanted an incantation. In a blink of an eye, a ray of red light flew out from the high cloud above. After shooting for 3 feet, an object leaped out along with the brilliance and arrived outside. As it was blown by the heavenly wind, its originally wrinkled body trembled. It turned out to be a bulging gray cloth sack filled with air. Gong Yangxing turned around and knelt down in front of the patriarch's divine statue. He kowtowed and prayed, "Forgive me, Patriarch." Just now that the horsetail whisk was destroyed by the 5-spirited white carp shuttle, he took out another one from his sleeve and flicked it at the statue. As if it was shedding a layer of clothing, the statue that was originally shining with spiritual light suddenly shone brightly like the sun. It was so blinding that the few people of the same sect behind him couldn't open their eyes. However, Gong Yangxing acted as if nothing had happened. With a respectful expression, he kowtowed to the statue again. He heard a drawn-out chant beside his ear. Smoke came out from the top of the statue. A talisman that looked like a snowflake floated out and slowly landed on his palm. He squeezed it and felt the vast mana within it. He covered his chest and bowed to the statue again. He chanted "Yes," and then used his index and middle fingers to clamp the talisman. He used a secret heart technique and threw it into the bag. The talisman instantly fused with the bag. Taoist Shah's bag was called the star-catching exquisite bag. It could hold 1,000 liters of sand and water. It was originally a profound weapon. It looked inconspicuous at first, and its surface was dark as if it was covered with a layer of gray wax. However, with the help of the talisman, it spun in the air. After a dozen rounds, the filth on it faded away and it emitted a precious light. Taoist Shah pointed with his hand and the bag immediately turned upside down. The mouth of the bag was aimed downwards and it came down on Zhang Yan's head. At the same time, he shouted, "Fellow sect members, help me." When the four of them heard this, they immediately activated their magic power. This bag was not small to begin with. Suddenly, it expanded to the size of a mountain. When it was about to fall down, the sky darkened. Looking up, the inside of the bag was pitch black. The bottom could not be seen. It was vast and empty, as if it could contain the entire Lu Qi mountain. Zhang Yan was always on guard. How would he let it fall? He immediately used the green light around him and went up to meet it. The combined mana of the five of them from Lai Xian sect was far stronger than Zhang Yan alone. They faced it head-on. The bag continued to press down, swallowing the green light bit by bit. However, Zhang Yan wasn't anxious. Based on the current situation, it would take at least an hour to subdue him. At that time, the magical treasure below would have long since emerged, and he would no longer have to worry about anything. He could go all out and fight. Gong Yangsheng looked at the battle situation. His eyes flashed. The third cloud above his head fluctuated in size, as if it was about to do something. In each cloud of his, there was a magical weapon. This was for the convenience of nurturing the magical weapon. He had already used the jasper rui and the black iron ruler. In the last cloud of the cloud, the magical weapon was a white wooden hairpin. It was made from the white ebony wood. It was also refined by an expert. It had been nurtured by him for hundreds of years and he had never used it before. He looked around. His eyes darted around. He was looking for the right time to make a move. He raised his hand a few times and put it down again. He had a feeling that if he were to make a move, he would not be able to succeed. He looked around a few more times and his heart moved. He seemed to have noticed the movement below and thought to himself, "It seems like the magical weapon is about to be completed. Once it appears, Priest Zhang will definitely be distracted. It won't be too late for me to make a move then." He glanced to his left and right, shooting a glance at his fellow disciples beside him. Then he stretched out his palm and made a pushing motion, then pointed at the high cloud above his head. He wanted his fellow disciples to work together to restrain Zhang Yan so that he could launch a sneak attack. The four of them knew that he had a magical weapon that he had not used yet. Looking at his actions, they immediately understood. They nodded their heads to show that they understood. Zhang Yan could feel the smoke from the furnace below. He knew that the treasure was right in front of him. However, the closer it was, the more alert he was. His gaze was like a knife and it became colder and sharper. He was very clear that at this critical moment, it was the most important and he could not relax. The moment the magical weapon appeared, the few people from Lai Xian sect would definitely stop him. They would not allow him to get the treasure easily. Both sides had their own plans. The battle was in a stalemate. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there was a loud rumble from the furnace. It was as if a bolt of lightning had exploded beside their ears. This sound seemed to be able to split the mountains and sink the earth. The mountains reverberated and shook. Even on the twin moon peak that was 500 miles away, everyone's ears were ringing and their heads were swollen. Zhang Yan seemed to be attracted by the sound as he tilted his head slightly to the side. A bright light flashed in his eyes. This was the moment. He pointed his finger, and a white light shot out from the high cloud like an arrow. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, it shot directly towards Zhang Yan. Although Zhang Yan was prepared, he did not expect the item to come so quickly. Just as he was about to activate the light from the treasure robe on his body to block the attack, there was an item at the bottom of the pit that shook and disappeared. In the blink of an eye, it appeared beside Zhang Yan and blocked in front of him. It was the magical weapon that sensed its master was in danger and jumped out to save him. With a cheese sound, the white wooden hairpin actually pierced through the object in one go. Zhang Yan did not expect that this newly refined magical weapon would have the ability to move through the void. While he was surprised, he couldn't help but feel puzzled. This magical weapon was refined from the remains of a big demon. Even if it was no match for the hairpin, how could it be pierced through? Just as he was puzzled, he suddenly felt a connection in his mind. He couldn't help but be surprised. When he looked at the magical weapon again, he already knew the cause and effect. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. He cupped his hands and said to Gong Yangxing, "Thank you, fellow cultivator, for helping my magical weapon break through." When Gong Yangxing heard this, he was puzzled at first. Then, his face suddenly became extremely ugly. It was obvious that he knew what had happened. His body trembled and he felt the blood in his chest churning. He almost spat out blood. When a magical weapon is born, it needs to be pierced through with a needle so that it can breathe in and out spiritual breath, sense warmth and cold, and exchange chi with the heaven and earth. However, it was unknown whether it was because the material used for this magical weapon was too good or some other reason, but its quality was too solid. The two people who were refining the magical weapon were, after all, only at the core transformation level. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't break through the chi aperture and complete this last step. Originally, when Zhang Yan was outside, he could still ask him to help. However, he was fighting with others and had no time to spare. Liang Changgong and Wei Shuden were also so anxious that their foreheads were full of sweat. If they missed the time, this magical weapon would not only be a useless treasure, but its quality would also be greatly reduced. It would be a waste of their previous efforts. Just when they were at their wits' end, who would have thought that the magical weapon would automatically fly out to protect its master? Using the white wooden hairpin that Gong Yangxing used to plot against Zhang Yan, it conveniently opened the spiritual aperture. Once this aperture was opened, this item could sense the spiritual vigor of the heaven and earth. It fused with the inside and outside, and in an instant, it became a treasure. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and the magical weapon automatically fell into his palm. Looking at it carefully, it looked like a small and tender golden leaf. It was only the size of a baby's palm. The veins on its whole body were clear, and it was overflowing with colorful lights. It was very delicate and pleasing to the eye. This was the first time this treasure had appeared in the world, and it was dancing with joy. It couldn't wait to send bursts of liveliness to his heart. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. Liang Changgong and Wei Shuden really lived up to their names as grandmasters. He also didn't expect that the moment this item was born, it was already a spiritual profound weapon that contained true consciousness. It could automatically protect its master and block disasters. If it was placed in the aperture points of the body or nurtured in the high cloud, it might be able to give birth to a true spirit in the future and become a true weapon. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.